To thank all of you for gathering here today. This is a really significant moment for 20 organizations that have committed to really advancing access to healthcare AI for all communities. I'm Sylvia Trujillo, the Executive Director of the California Telehealth Resource Center. Whether you're joining us in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Hawaii, mahalo, or you are anywhere virtually in the country today, we are so glad you are part of this journey with us. Today's boot camp is a collaboration of multiple telehealth resource centers from across the nation, in fact, the majority, a telehealth center of excellence, and many other partner organizations, some of which the in-person folks have met virtually or in person. We're all committed to accelerating healthcare AI literacy, readiness, and responsible adoption. This first session we're going to have is titled Leveling Up AI Awareness and Anticipation. And I'm going to ask our person to advance our slide deck for us. Thank you. For today's virtual session, I'm going to have you advance again, if you could. We're going to have a number of sessions, 2 morning sessions with Q&A for each, a 30-minute lunch break, which we might shorten up given the delay in our start time, and 2 afternoon sessions. For the in-person folks, we'll also have some networking at the end of the day. For our virtual participants, we want to make sure that you know that the Zoom link will be available all day long for the duration of the presentation. So even while we are taking a break for lunch, we will keep the same line open. The virtual program will wrap at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So a couple of items, the use for the virtual folks, the use of the Q&A function is available to you to ask questions. The chat has been disabled. Today's sessions are being recorded and will be available on the AI Bootcamp YouTube channel by the end of the month. And if you have any technical issues, if you're online, reach out to the CTRC team via Zoom, chat, or email us at contact@healthaibootcamp.org. So please advance. Great, thank you. We'd like to thank the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which has funded the majority of, well, all of the TRCs who are partnering from across the country, as well as the Center of Excellence. And we'd like to thank all of our partners who are not TRCs who've also contributed and supported the event. We want to make clear that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is not endorsing the content, and all the materials are for informational and educational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional, legal, or billing advice. Turns out that's pretty important as part of this conversation. If we advance to the next slide, this is a really important slide because this slide that is coming up is really about community. As you can see, the organizations participating literally span the continent. And this is a testament to the appetite and interest among so many of your peers and colleagues from across the country and other organizations that have really dedicated their vision, their community, their resources to advancing access, particularly to underserved and rural communities. So we're really grateful to those contributions. So now we're going to move to the first session, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first 2 speakers. So we will first have Dr. Abramoff, and just quick background, I shared a little bit about him. Unfortunately, he was not able to join us today. There's going to be some big, interesting announcement. I can't wait to hear all about it, given he is the groundbreaking physician innovator who brought us the first de novo authorized autonomous AI system. But he is going to have a special message for us, and there's going to be a very cool format we put together with our other very illustrious speaker, Jordan Berg, who's the principal investigator of the National Telehealth Technology and Assessment Center. He has over 16 years of leadership in health IT evaluation and adoption. And he is going to share not only a practical perspective on AI readiness and adoption, but really he's going to help us think through the fundamental framework of how you should think about AI, since it's not one thing, and how you can do the essential questions so that at the end of the day, when you're using these tools, you will probably be one of the most, if not the most informed person in your organization, how to think about these issues. And you can take these frameworks and these questions to your colleagues and your leadership to make sure that others are as informed and ready as you. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jordan.
Okay, thanks everybody. For people in the room, you guys have been watching me scramble around for the last 20 minutes. So, and then for people online, I've been scrambling around the room for the last 20 minutes, but we are here to talk to you about artificial intelligence and kind of how it impacts for you. So I am the bread in the first section sandwich we have for you. Dr. Abramoff has a really wonderful recording for you. And my job here is to help. He's providing a very specific use case. And what I want to do is take his specific use case and generalize it and help us break down and really use it as a learning experience for how do we think about AI? How do we break this down? Now, what we're going to see, I have no conflicts of interest. I really wish I'd bought in a lot of AI stock, but I didn't, and that's not just where we're at. So what we want to do is, you may see some visual and some things that I'm saying that are similar to maybe some of the sessions that you had in the earlier AI Bootcamp. I want to draw that through line for you guys so that you guys can know the stuff that you saw in the virtual sessions is the same things that we're covering today. It's how are we thinking about these tools. We want to look at a real world AI system, look at how it was implemented, and then in the specific case, we're looking at an autonomous diabetic retinopathy screening tool. We want to be able to apply the AI framework that we've talked with you about several times in all the online sessions. And then we want to provide you with some practical takeaways that you can take back to your organizations, back to your communities, and be able to start breaking down what are these AI systems and how do we actually make them work for us. A couple key things to remember from previous sessions. AI is transformative. It's changing the way that we do business. I think this is becoming kind of a moot point. I think people recognize AI is here. It's impactful. It can potentially be helpful. It can also potentially be harmful, and we need to make sure that we're looking at it. The other thing I want to just underline is it's not one thing. We talk about AI, and we could be talking about a variety of different solutions, a variety of different systems, ranging from visually based diabetic retinopathy screening, which is what we're going to see, to chat models, to creating translation services. We're facing workforce shortages, and I think that's probably the critical thing that we're all looking at is how do we do so much more with so much less. We are facing more and more increased demands for technicality and for capacity in the care that we are delivering. And then we are facing a chronic disease epidemic that's really infecting every level of our society, but particularly those that are rural and underserved. So I want to run through this framework, and this is one of the things I want you to keep in mind as you're listening to Dr. Abramoff speak, is this is the structure that we're choosing to use. And I'll do this very, very quickly, but systems are the underpinning technology, the AI technology. That might be optical character recognition, that might be generative AI. There's a variety of different systems that are there. Methods are the way that we are approaching or using no, sorry, and I've already messed up. bear with me. Systems are the overall tool. So it's the thing that you build. Methods are the underlying AI technology that we're using to empower our systems. Functionalities are the things that we need those systems to do. The level of autonomy is the way that we interact with the AI. Is this a helper? Is this someone that we give a job and it goes out and does the job? Or is this something that we use to like check, just to make sure that we're doing it, doing the things that we want? So we can refer to those in three different levels: assistive, augmentative, or autonomous. And then we also want to consider what is the nature of the space that we're deploying these things into. Conditions of employment. We want to look from the very beginning at the entry points of bias throughout the life cycle, and we want to consider the applications that these solutions have in healthcare. So in this session, what I really want to draw our attention to is this is some of the things that we're going to be hearing. We're going to get a practical, sorry, and I need to churn a little bit so I could see. Oh, we need a practical example of AI from the point of that it was innovated to the point that it was actually delivering care. That sort of arc is really hard to find in these stories. So this is a really unique, interesting thing. So we want to pay attention to that. We also want to listen to Dr. Abramoff describe what AI really does well. What are the things that it's excellent at doing versus maybe a human? We want to see how real-world impacts of bias and regulation and reimbursement impact our ability to actually deploy this, to generate buy-in, to get people on board with the solutions. And we really want to look at how he focuses on the patient outcomes and what the organizational realities are for these solutions. We're going to listen for the AI job being done. We're going to watch as he traces the path through method, system, and deployment. We're going to look at the implications of full autonomy. We're going to consider how bias and ethics are measured and managed at every step of development. And we're going to look at how we have to build the ecosystem for AI to actually thrive in our solutions. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop talking and we're going to listen to Dr. Abramoff. Oh, I think we might need to reshare with the audio. One second here, guys. Yes.
My name is Michael Abramoff, and I'm very excited to be talking to you about leveling up AI awareness and anticipation. Like I said, my name is Michael Abramoff. I am both a professor of ophthalmology at the University of Iowa and also founder of a company, an AI company called Digital Diagnostics. I have some other roles, but they're not relevant right now. Obviously, I have some conflicts of interest. They're listed here. I won't go into detail because you can read it. And so part of this is a little bit of a personal journey to explain why we are where we are really in AI. So this is me at a little bit younger age, talking about neural networks and machine learning and maybe how we can use that in healthcare. So very, naive physician scientist. Here's me as a resident, and I did some work on machine learning for, in this case, a complication of diabetes called diabetic retinopathy, which, by the way, happens to be the most important cause of blindness among Americans. So it's also relevant to be able to prevent it and diagnose it earlier. But again, it was at the time primarily, can we actually do this with a computer, and what is the science behind it? Did a ton of work, got some patents. I think there's 28 now. By now, this is a little bit of an older slide. Many scientific papers, and still none of this had benefited any patients. And that is really the challenge where we are right now. You hear a lot about AI. Most of it, if you look into it in detail, most of it is academic, or it's hype and has not been really proven in a healthcare setting. And so you really need to think about how we can get from really the science and the engineering on the left to, clinic where you may be practicing medicine and trying to improve patient outcomes on the right. I think that's the key, what we'll be talking about. And if you're a little bit familiar with how drugs are typically created, that's an industry called pharma. And there's a well-known path, well-trodden path, I have to say, where if you do an invention like this light bulb on the left, it's an old-fashioned light bulb, obviously, I'm old, so I can use that. But let's say you do an invention and you think of some protein that can make blind children see. There's a path where typically if you're in an academic environment, it will be patented, and then a pharmaceutical company can come in and take it through various stages of validation, meaning does it work maybe in animals, does it work in human models, and then clinical trials, and ultimately there's a path to getting this to patients and for the pharma company making a lot of money. For AI, none of that today and in the past exists. So there's no big AI company that will take, let's say that you have this cool invention with a cool AI that actually works and take it all the way to patients. So that had to be, created, that path. And I'm afraid it's a little bit complex. So here's what I had to get through. It's cool to be the first to do something like this. It's also lots of hurdles and challenges to do something like this. And so I'm pretty open about what needs to happen. So all the way on the left, you see here a multi-layer neural network, an AI, a diagnostic AI algorithm. And like I said, the science, the validation had really been done. But it doesn't mean that it would get all the way on the right to patients where it benefits patients and actually improves their outcomes. It required creating ethics for AI, which was new. It meant working very closely with FDA on AI regulation, and it continues to this day. I'm deeply involved in that. But again, if you have your invention, there's a path. There's a path. You don't need to do all of these, but you will need to be aware of all of these steps. Big thing is liability. If you, in medicine and healthcare, who's liable if something goes wrong? If the patient dies or goes blind or has an undesirable outcome, who's actually liable? And we make errors, we continue to make errors as human providers, as AIs. That is never going to be perfect. It's never going to go away. So how do we deal with that? And important step was saying that at least for autonomous AIs, which is where the AI makes the clinical decision, and not every AI is like that. Some AIs just assist a clinician make a better decision, and then obviously the liability is the standard liability, medical malpractice suits, etc. But for autonomous AI, I said, and the American Medical Association agrees, that the liability for the performance of the AI should be with the company, with the creator of that AI, not the user. So if you're a health system, if you're a provider and use autonomous AI, you should not be held liable if that AI isn't working like it should. It should be the creator. And at least my company has been very clear about that. Another issue that needed to be addressed is the concern about racial and ethnic bias. So how do you discover where bias can occur, and that is more than just training? There's a lot more ways where you can introduce undesirable racial, ethnic, socioeconomic bias. And so how do you address that and make sure that it doesn't affect the results and also the outcomes of the patient? So together with FDA, we created a framework for addressing bias and mitigating it. And we were able to prove in the clinical trials that there was no significant racial, ethnic bias. Important for any provider is that they feel more comfortable using any device, any drug when it's part of the standard of care. And so it was a big moment when the American Diabetes Association decided to make autonomous AI for the diabetic eye exam part of the standard of care. That also allowed organizations in value-based care like National Committee of Quality Assurance to allow an autonomous AI to qualify for closing care gaps for HEDIS and MIPS, ultimately leading to a reimbursement. And there was a whole ecosystem that had to be created to allow coverage and payment for an AI where there's no human involvement. How do you do that? What is the CPT code going to be like? What is the payment going to be like? All of that needed to be done. And again, all of this has to be done before it can benefit the first patient. None of this is, it helps getting it to patients. It's all necessary, but even when you do all of these things, it still hasn't benefited a single patient. So ultimately, that's what this is about. That's why, we do all this work, is to benefit patients. And what was exciting is doing clinical trials, doing randomized control trials to show better outcomes for patients. And that's really happening now, as well as, making sure it's being used and to benefit patients, because we now know it does from the results of these trials. So long path, but all of it is necessary. So what is this specific AI about, you may ask? And so it's an autonomous AI for the diabetic eye exam. And, just as an aside, it was the first ever. So that's why a lot of, the path that I showed cleared, it has been cleared, and we had to. So it's a fully autonomous AI. It makes the medical decision by itself, no human oversight, for diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema, which are primary causes of blindness in the US overall, not only in people with diabetes. Proven to have no racial or ethnic bias in that clinical trial I explained a little bit about. It's more accurate than any retina specialist. I was trained as a vitreoretinal surgeon myself, and it's way more accurate than me, but also any colleague. Medical liability I mentioned, that lies with the creator, the company, not with the user. Very important should be. And we paid a lot of attention to making this work in a workflow in a primary care environment where no one has experience with this type of imaging. And so it's really important that even if you don't use it all day, every day, occasional use a few times per day, that you still get guided through it with a lot of, assistive AI around it to tell you what is a good image, what is a bad image, when do you need to retake it, what do you tell the patient. That's all been taken care of to make sure it's as easy as can in that primary care workflow. I mentioned that's key, and that it was also evaluated in. And then very important for any health system is that you can bill for it, you get paid, and it also closes MIPS and HEDIS care gaps. That was a lot of work on the policy side, but the important thing is it works for primary care and front lines of care environment. Next. Sorry. And so I mentioned evidence, and what is good about actually being in the real world out there is that you can do real world evidence studies, including randomized controlled trials with the existing layout and existing clinics that already adopted it. So there's a few shown here. But again, the key is that once you have that evidence, all the other parts of convincing stakeholders that this is the right thing to do becomes much easier. And one of the example is productivity and efficiency and physician satisfaction, where we showed, and this is in a low-income country, totally remote install, that indeed in a randomized controlled trial, meaning an AI arm and an arm where there was traditional care, it's 40% more efficient, and physicians are actually, happier, more pleased with their work. And we did it together with, as an aside, with the Flying Eye Hospital, or Orbis. And, this is really interesting organization where they help low-income countries get better care by having there's literally an OR on this plane, and they can then demonstrate, how to take better care of patients and train local physicians. I will skip through these other randomized controlled trials and other studies. And then you get, press releases like this where Stanford chief data scientist says that this is the best AI they're aware of. Again, that shows the stakeholder buy-in that is so crucial for getting this widely implemented to benefit patients. And as you can see here, in orange, that's this diabetic eye exam, the autonomous diabetic eye exam. There's one other AI, that's the blue one, that's even bigger for cardiac outflow, for managing people with heart disease. But these are really the only two AIs, one of them autonomous, that are out there that are actually really benefiting patients at scale. And it's not enough. I mean, we should be doing more of this, but it's at least getting there. And this goes back to, how do you get there from an algorithm or an ID that you may have to getting this to benefit patients? It's really crucial that you start with what is benefits the patients most, what is beneficial for patient outcome, rather than say, wow, there's this cool ChatGPT. Let's find, how this can benefit patients. Now, I think in my view, you should always start with what is beneficial to patients, efficiency, quality of care, better outcomes, and then try to fit your technology into that rather than the obverse. And that's how you get round pegs into round holes, rather than having glamour AI, which is cool technologically and from a AI perspective, but not really helpful for patients. And part of that is, do not create this type of AI in a silo. If you're thinking about this, if you're doing it already, talk to other stakeholders, talk to patients, talk to providers, talk to payers. All of them have a say. All of them have their opinions and what should be done, and that avoids having pink glasses on and seeing unicorns and rainbows where they actually don't exist. And so, I love this slide because it really shows how to get this right and make sure it benefits the stakeholders. And here is a extensive list of the stakeholders, and they may sound a little bit like PP in the top right image, but if you don't take care of this, any of them can say stop, and then it doesn't really happen. Then you will have many years of delays, like happened with gene therapy, which was set back for 20 years because some groups did unethical experiments and young people died. I mean, and then people say stop, we don't want this, it's too scary. So we need to get it right, and we can get it right, and we have done it right. There's bad AI out there, but there's also a lot of good AI out there that is benefiting patients. Part of that is ethics, and I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but one of the messages is that you can have outside ethical experts looking in, and you see this in bigger tech companies, or you can give your developers, the people who are building the AI tools, the tools in hand to measure how much they meet ethical principles. And the whole backstory to that, it's written down in very scientific papers. Some of them I'm showing the references here, but you can really build regulation on an ethical framework that actually works for an engineer, for a developer, as well as reimbursement. And part of, a lot of the work was done on policy on how do you have an ethical framework for reimbursement? How do you get to, in this case, $55 per patient, where that has never been done before because no one knew how to pay for AI work where there's no human involved. How do you pay a computer? What is the worth of a computer? What is the worth of an AI like that? And we worked it out, and CMS supported that, and all the other organizations, physicians, patient organizations, standards of care all supported that. And so here we are. And then with all this work done, still less than 2% of all patients have now undergone, with diabetes, have now undergone this diabetic eye exam through AI that they all need. So, vast majority do not even have access to these exciting tools. So how do we get more of that? And that's really a matter, in my view, of policy. How do we get Congress to support, paying for this, making sure that they understand you have good AI and bad AI. We can measure the difference. So here's me doing congressional briefing only a few weeks ago where we talked about these exact things. Do we know how to get AI right and wrong? Yeah, we do. We can measure the difference. How do we pay for it? Can we pay for it in a way that actually saves money on the budget and doesn't, blow up the budget? Yes, we can. And what needs to happen? Well, there's all these very wonky recommendations that you can talk about, and I'm not going to do that. But the point is, it can be done, and it's being done. So very exciting. And that, is why I want to finish on a very positive note. The future for AI in healthcare is, I think, looking very bright. You can take off those pink glasses now. These, rainbows are really out there. The unicorns are really out there. We just need to continue getting it right. Thank you very much. And I hope, this will be a very exciting day for all of us. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Right? See, this is the way I like to do presentations, is like I come in and talk for 2 minutes in the front, 2 minutes in the back, and somebody else does all the heavy lifting. But I do want to just underline a couple of the things that we heard. I hope we all had our assessment glasses on we were kind of listening through this, looking for kind of keywords, what works, what doesn't work. And I think we're going to just pick this apart just a little bit, and then we'll kind of move us on to some questions, and then going on to the next step. So let's talk about breaking down the AI fundamentals framework for this particular use case. So the systems being used, right? What did we build? We built an autonomous digital AI diabetic retinopathy screening. What methods did we use? Well, we used computer vision, but above that, the one thing that is kind of almost goes under the radar was the assistive tools for actually capturing the images. And I think that's one of the key things here is like we're doing the diabetic retinopathy mapping, we're looking at it, we're comparing it to our model, we're identifying that disease state, but we're also building AI tools that are useful for capturing the images, which anybody who's done any diabetic retinopathy imaging will know it's very complex, very hard to do accurately. And using an assistive AI, we can make that process better, easier, quicker, and more functional. So functionalities are capturing the image with the technology, and then doing the retinal imaging interpretation and decision. Level of autonomy is autonomous, but again, we've already just described, it's also assistive. So we've got two levels of AI working here. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to learn more and more is that we probably won't be using a single AI. We'll be using various different AIs that are working together. You'll hear the term agentic, right? Like agents, AI agents that are coming together to provide a overall service. What were the conditions of deployment? One of the things that he really emphasized, and I thought this was very important, was the importance of primary care. Do we do a lot of diabetic retinopathy screening in primary care right now? Not as much as we can or should, and it requires specialized people to actually go in and do this. If we have a solution that's automated, we can do this at the primary care level. We can do this from a bus or from a plane and actually really get this out way more broadly without the need to have a bunch of staff that are trained to do this. Throughout the life cycle of the project, looking at the frameworks that they would need to use to address bias, to address reimbursement, and to make sure that we were actually going to be able to get this from the idea stage to the actual deployment stage. So this was the big scary slide he put up here. So I want to emphasize, this is not the expectation for most folks. You're not going to start from an idea, from a conceptual piece of technology, but the steps that were laid out here are really, really useful for us. So we're not going to start from like a university-created AI algorithm for most of us. We're going to look at vendors, we're going to look at services, we're going to look at things like that. But all of these other steps, making sure that we have an ethical foundation for how we work with these, that our vendors have ethical foundation, doing the asking the question of like, what is the liability? Who's responsible for that? All of these steps are going to be valuable for us, even if we're not creating these things from scratch. So what did this AI do? What did this AI solution do? It took a very complex imaging process and simplified it so that it could be deployed at scale. It created much more accuracy, so it was able to do these tests quickly and more accurately than humans. It provided a way to provide more access to these services at a lower level of care. And it provided a way to scale this across different organizations with a plan for ROI and how to pay for itself. So the broader lessons, and again, I get the advantage of watching something and I just get to pick out the things that I like. So this is easy. But the broader lessons that I see in this, but maybe you take some different broader lessons, but these are the ones I think we should focus on, is the focus has to be on outcomes and it has to be on patients. You know, I always love the quote, education's not an end in itself, or education must have an end in view because it's not an end in itself. And I feel that's the same for technology. If we start from the device, if we start from the technology, if we start from the, like, that looks cool, those are the things that end in drawers. Those are the things that don't get used. But if we start from the patient, if we start from the outcomes that we're looking for, those are technologies that will have a path forward in our systems. We have to have a firm understanding of the job that we're giving AI to do. So I like this one. I had a ChatGPT spin this one up for me. We want our AIs having IKEA instructions, right? We want to understand the workflows and the things that we want it to do. We want to have it broken out. We want to have it step by step so that we understand when things go wrong, when we understand that things we're not getting the outcomes, or the inputs aren't matching the outputs. We want to engage with ethical and bias frameworks early and often. We want to make sure that we have regulatory clarity. What is going to be reimbursed? How is it going to be reimbursed? Who is liable? Who has the responsibility? We want to make sure that we can actually reimburse and be paid for the things that we're trying to do. And we want to make sure, and I think he emphasized this, but it could have been, I want to underline this, the stakeholder alignment. He had that big list of everyone that needed to kind of be at the table for these things to work. That applies at our clinical as well. You need your security folks, your IT security folks. You need your ethical, you need your ethical boards. You need everyone who's going to be touching this, purchasing and procurement, all the way down the pipeline, and the providers that are actually going to have to use this day to day. And that's where the focus on outcome and patients is actually going to make this palatable to your providers, because this could be a scary thing if we say like, hey, we're looking to deploy solutions that can do your job better than you. That's not a winning conversation. But if the conversation is we can make improvements, we can make life better for our patients, that makes these technologies easier to grasp and more interest. And at that, I want to turn things over for questions. I think we had a couple questions in the room, and then I think we're going to go to online. Or do we have questions in the room? We got one up here. Mike's on its way.
Yeah, I have a question. I thought it was interesting that there was in the path of the journey, there was a section for liability. And I think having brought some AI options into the environment and having them denied by risk management, liability is a huge thing for us because we don't have faith in the AI. And if it makes a mistake, the provider or the clinic is liable for that misdiagnosis or something. Is there a movement, and I don't know, maybe there is by AMA and others, to shift that liability to the vendor to make this easier for us to implement?
I'm going to definitely punt on that, because there's a whole session that we're going to have a little bit later today, all completely focused around liability. And then anything I say right now, Sylvia is going to have to correct me on. So, but yes, the short answer is yes. There's a lot of questions and a lot of movement on how do we actually make the liability so that it makes sense, so that the providers are responsible for things that providers control, and software developers are responsible for the things that the software developers control. And then how are we making sure that we're checking and rechecking and following up and looking at these systems to make sure they're still doing the job that they started doing?
I'm going to just provide a quick preview to that question. I actually was at the AMA and was part of the team that started the journey related to AI policy. And you put your finger on one of the reasons we started the journey. It was very clear back in 2016 that the large tech companies were very interested in healthcare. They were very uninterested in assuming any responsibility for liability. And so AMA has very clear policy that you have to align the incentives. So to the extent that you have a black box, the liability should go to the developer. And to the extent there is greater transparency, it should flow to the end user. So the party that's best positioned to mitigate should bear the burden of liability. It's much more involved than that, but we hope to lay out a clear set of questions that you should consider. And Dr. Abramoff, the way we came to know him is that he was on this journey and he was the only clinician innovator, and the only innovator of hundreds that we talked to at the time who voluntarily said, I'm offering an autonomous AI system. The liability lies with me, with the developer. And when we interviewed every other developer, innovator who had great ideas, we're going to transform medicine, going to help patients. And so when we got to the question of autonomy and liability, every single one of them punted and said, well, this is really more an assistive tool, so the liability should lie with the clinician. So it's 2025. This conversation started in 2016. There's been a lot of work in the intervening period of time, and we'll talk about that this afternoon. So an incentive for you to stay.
Okay, and I'm getting a sign that we have 5 minutes here. For folks in the room, we will be coming back to you continuously throughout the day for questions. So just you've been forewarned. But I do want to see if we can throw it over to the online folks as well and see if we have any questions coming in from online.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions coming in online, so I'll just read some of them. How do you prevent these technologies becoming proprietary and forcing physicians to become mandatory subscribers in order to serve patients and increase operating costs, just like the EMR?
I'm looking to Sylvia on this one too. It's an issue and it's a challenge. I think one of the things that we've seen recently is the term that I really like is walled garden. And everybody wants to be the Apple of healthcare or the Apple of AI, and they want you in their system and they want you in your infrastructure. I think we had a really good conversation about this at dinner yesterday. I think a lot of this has to do with really making good tools for the portability of healthcare information, so that the patients are the ones that are actually able to access and move their information from one location to another. And I think part of that too is making sure that the outputs that we have from these AI services are structured in a way that they can be ingested and moved into EHRs, into other systems, and kind of throughout. But it's a question that's coming up, and I don't know that there's a completely 100% good answer for it yet. But
I thought that was great. And I'll just also give credit to Dr. Go, who also offered some observations that there's not one single solution. So to be clear, Dr. Sendek and I, going back nearly a decade, have a conversation. There's a lot of different AI systems, but broadly speaking, there are two categories. There are AI systems that large health systems develop. They're implemented in-house. They're designed, developed, validated, and deployed, and then retired within health systems. And they look a lot like, if you're familiar with clinical laboratory testing, they look a lot like laboratory developed testing services and procedures that are regulated under the Clinical Lab Improvement Act amendments. And then there are devices, and devices are not intended to be deployed in a single system, but they're designed to be monetized, commercialized, and they are distributed throughout the country. They go through the FDA, and they're called devices. And so there's a lot of different regulatory models that folks are talking about. And in fact, Dr. Sednick has published on this topic. So Jordan hit it on its head. Dr. Go last night talked about many different deployment conditions, different systems, some of which integrate. There's not one single solution. But Dr. Abramoff, once again, was, I think, prescient on this question of creating pharma-like tools that do rate-seeking or rent-seeking behavior, so charging really astronomical prices for these tools. And he, again, was one of the few individuals we talked to who said, we shouldn't be seeking rent-seeking behaviors. We shouldn't have really high pricing for AI tools. We need to democratize it. Individuals who innovate can be rewarded by the sheer volume. but the costs that should be charged should be quite low, because you can scale in a way that you can't scale individual services or other innovations. So that is really what we should be talking about from a policy perspective. You don't have to be pharma in order to make money in this space.
And I think we are at time. So we're going to go ahead and hand it off to the next session. Online folks, give us just a moment here while we reset and get ready for your next session.
Okay, very short transition time for you all. Welcome to our session entitled Risk and Responsibility in Healthcare. I'm really excited to have two of our physician researchers and folks who really have, I think, taken the national landscape by storm in some cases. Really, we're representing what I would say is dramatically different continuums of researchers who are looking at the most appropriate uses of AI systems. And I just want to remind folks that there's a framework. When they're talking about the research that they're doing, please keep in the back of your minds, what type of AI systems are they talking about? Not all AI systems are the same. What are their conditions of deployment? What are the levels of oversight? And be sure to ask them those questions so that you have a better understanding. Those questions are important because they define vectors of risk. So levels of autonomy is important. Conditions of deployment can also affect your risk. When you think about functionality, that can also affect risk. And certainly methods can affect the level of risk. And so I want you to start thinking within that framework, because there can be conditions of deployment that are relatively lower risk, although they may use more higher risk methods or systems or levels of autonomy. And we'll practice that some more during lunch and at the end of the day. So I'd first like to welcome Dr. Chandra, the Chief Telehealth Officer at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. He hails from one of the telehealth centers of excellence, only one of two in the nation. Dr. Chandra has an illustrious career in his practice. He's led major telehealth and digital health initiatives across the country, from Northwell Health's COVID response in New York to the University Medical Center in Mississippi Center for Telehealth. In addition to being a practicing intensivist and strategic telehealth leader, he recently added an MBA to his credentials. When he's not out trailblazing virtual care, he's learning and living the culture of the Deep South. Next to him is Dr. Ethan Go, who's the executive director of Stanford's ARISE network, where he leads multi-center evaluations of large language models in healthcare. He's a physician scientist with publications in Nature Medicine and JAMA. He's also the associate editor for BMG Digital Health and AI. So if you want to get published, he might be a good person to talk to. So these two gentlemen represent, I think, the best of the profession in terms of the North Star in transformation and innovation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our first presenter.
Well, it's so great to be here learning with everyone today. I'm really excited about some of the upcoming talks. So my presentation today is going to be about the research coming out of ARISE. Briefly about myself, my name is Ethan Goh. I'm a physician scientist. I'm based primarily at Stanford within a research group. It's a very traditional setup. What it really means is that we do research, we apply for grants, and then we use the money to do more research. But as you can see through the earlier presentations, it's been a particularly exciting time. And I think because we sit within Stanford Healthcare, and most of the researchers in our group are like myself, physician scientists, clinical informaticists, or software engineers. We have obviously more of a focus on physician-facing tools primarily, meaning to say that we skew more towards a translational side along the type of studies and prototypes we're building. What ARISE is briefly is back in 2022, we were running a series of RCTs across different sites, primarily anchored at Stanford and Beth Israel. But we were really interested about how doctors using AI tools would perform on some of these more robust measures. And I think as Sylvia kindly mentioned, I also sit on the BMJ AI editorial board. So if anyone has interesting submissions, please consider submitting. And on the other side, that just means that I have the privilege of actually seeing a lot of interesting, almost frontier up and coming technologies. If you want to learn more about our ARISE's interest, that's the QR code, or you can head over to our website. All right, let's dive right into it. Oops. Okay, so hands up, how many of you saw some of this really interesting headlines across the past 6 months? Can I get a show of hands? How many of you saw this quite interesting headlines, right? Claiming things like, oh, New York Times AI chatbots defeated doctors at diagnosing illness. And then I think just last month, Microsoft, to a lot of fanfare, right? I think even on social media, Instagram, a lot was saying, oh, it's new AI system, diagnose patients 4 times more accurately. What does that even mean, right? How do you do 4 times more accurate? So I think I wanted to anchor, the direction of this presentation to put into these questions. So if you look at those headlines, right, as you can see, I think even on Instagram, they're trying to transform this into all these quite intriguing headlines. I think a few questions would come to mind, right? One is obviously, why are we even comparing doctors versus AI, right? Why are we even doing that? Whether it's research, operational, translational, why are we even thinking about this, right? And two, okay, so you say you want to compare doctors versus AI, right? I guess the next question is, how do you even compare doctors AI in a way that actually makes sense? And in a way that robust, journals would actually publish and say it's credible. And I think the next most important question is, if these results are real, right? What are the kind of implications, for physicians, the workforce, so on and so forth. Before I get into some of these research studies and answering those questions, I just wanted to give kind of a quick 2-slide primer on how, a useful mental model of how to think about how LMs work. And what me and John Chen, who's a co-PI, he's a PI at ARISE, based at Stanford, working closely with myself, what he likes to say is think of LMs as autocomplete on steroids, right? So, when you type in words, for example, in this instance, coronary artery, how does Google know what the next most common word searches, right? The reason it knows is that they take a lot of data from other similar searches, and they can assign probability or statistics, right? To say, all right, is it the most common is probably if someone is looking for coronary artery, the next most common is coronary artery disease, right? And then the next most common is maybe coronary artery disease symptoms, so on and so forth. And I just wanted to point out something, right? So on the left, you can see sort of this very nice Google graphic saying that actually a lot of these are still quite new emerging capabilities. Everything from healthcare to writing a nice haiku or poem to drafting something in the style of a rapper, for example, right? A lot of these discoveries, even for researchers like myself, are still ongoing. And to point out how some of these things can be quite surprising, right? If you look, I do sometimes receive interesting messages, and I think this was one on a social media platform from Joe Weber, who is the inventor of autocomplete, right? One of the earlier technologies. And he said, all right, I was one of the inventors of these technologies. And even now I'm still gobsmackingly impressed of how, they are able to come up with these responses. I don't have a clue, right? I think that's to speak to the fact that a lot of these technologies in terms of the capabilities are still evolving, and we still don't fully grasp all of them, which is why a lot of this performance indexing is so critical and important. And so moving on, I mentioned early on in 2022, we decided to start looking at how doctors using AI tools would perform. I think this was one of the inspirations, right? In 2022, there were all the studies coming out that said, all right, GPT 3.5 scored 60% on the US MLE. So for those who are unaware, the US MLE exam is an exam that all medical school students, residents have to take to become fully qualified, right? So maybe if you were to look at the score back then, all right, 60%, interesting, right? But no one really wants to see a doctor who's barely passing. I think just to give you a sense of how the performance was back then. And then looking to 2024, all right, suddenly, it's scoring 86%. And if you actually indexed it now, it's literally off the charts, right? And this is just talking about open models with minimal fine-tuning, training, and a lot of other techniques you can do to improve these models. So as you can see, obviously, from the direct, going to the roof, it's improving very, very extremely fast. But I think a fair critique then as well, oops, how do I go back one? Is doctors don't do MCQs, right? Going back to the question of how do we even compare indexes of performance, right? I think a fair pushback by a lot of medical journal editors, physicians is, all right, these exams are good, but they're kind of a plaything, right? You don't go to see a doctor and present a list of A, B, C, D and tell a doctor, pick one, right? Which diagnosis, which treatment you want me to do for you. And so, let me get to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the meaning next, right? Because I think it's important for everyone here to have some degree of, some basis of understanding, right? Whenever there's a headline like this, how are the studies conducted? What are we actually measuring? Why are we measuring? So the New York Times headline actually was based on one of our earlier studies. It was a small CT, about 50 physicians. I'll go a little more into that. But why it actually captured so much imagination in headlines was because, surprisingly, even for us, we actually discovered that the AI alone did better on this simulated series of cases. As you can see, it got 90%, right? And doctors without AI got 74%. And even doctors using AI still didn't do very much better than the AI alone. So obviously that was quite surprising and we didn't expect that. But just to give you an illustration of how quirky reporting can be, right? I think it was 2 a.m. I was in Tokyo. The same day the New York Times article got published, I got a phone call from Washington Post, right? Asking me about this study because I thought she found it really interesting as well. But I think the headline, as you can see, is still accurate, but it's not quite the message that New York Times went with, even though I told her exactly the same thing, right? And then in this instance, her read of it was that ChatGPT, and it's still correct, by the way, right? If you look at the graph, ChatGPT is little help for doctors in diagnosing disease, studies fine. Saying this because I thought it was an interesting way to show how journalists tend to report on what they find the most interesting for their story. Okay, so I'm going to go briefly into what we actually did for this study. So it gives you some sense of what the participants actually went through. So as you can see here, I said earlier on that multiple choice questions are not quite representative of what a doctor actually does in day-to-day care, right? So what we actually did in this instance was that we used a series of real clinical vignettes and open-ended questions, not unlike what a medical school student would do about year 3 or year 4, where he starts moving away from USMA multiple choice questions to maybe more using patient actors, going into a room with maybe someone like Dr. Chandra, assessing him and asking him this sort of open-ended questions, right? So in this example, it could look something like this, 72-year-old man, hypertension, smoking, telling him the past medical history, and a simple open-ended question like this, right? Instead of multiple choice questions, you're just asking, and a medical student has to answer. What are the 3 most likely diagnoses for this patient's primary complaint of shortness of breath? So it's not constrained anymore, right? It's not, hey, chatbot, human, pick one of the 4 best answers. Obviously, by chance, it's a lot higher. Suddenly, because of the open-ended nature, as well as the open-ended grading rubric, right? What that really means is that because it's a free text response, how does a human grader then assign scores to a free text response as well? And so you can see it's not didactic. There's some rubric grading guidelines. So a lot of the work really goes into designing really customized, meaningful rubrics, right? That a bunch of experts would agree is fair to score this rubric on. So we had attending doctors basically scoring all the students. And as I mentioned, it's suggestive. It's not at all exhaustive. And so as you can see here, right, first of all, how did GPT 3.5, and I know now we're on GPT 5 already, but back then, how did 3.5 do? Okay, got 70%, which is not bad, considered passing score for medical students, a lot who are at Stanford taking this study. And how did GPT-4 do? Suddenly paralleling the earlier graph I showed you, right? It was really doing a lot better, somewhere in the order of 87, almost 90%. And it was already defeating medical students. I think this was sometime 2022 when we did the study. And so the next thing becomes, all right, these are medical students, right? So they don't form a very, very fair basis. And quickly to jump into the question one, right? Why are we even comparing, doctors versus AI? One of the ways of thinking is that it gives us a basis for comparison, because if we tell AI is this harmful, right? As humans, we don't have a mental model on what we are comparing against, right? Whereas if we can tell you that a doctor today who is trained and qualified is doing to this performance, that becomes a lot easier to understand the trade-offs. And that's really why you're seeing all these headlines and studies that are comparing both. I know we're running a bit low on time, so I'm just going to go through quickly the next study and what we did. So earlier on, we did medical students. This one was attendings, right? I think, again, a pushback going from multiple choice, open-ended questions to medical students, attendings. So once again, and this was a study this year published in Nature Medicine. We repeated the study, this time with real cases. We fed the information bit by bit to simulate a more realistic case. And this time we had trained attending physicians from Stanford, Harvard, Virginia, Minnesota. Almost 100 doctors do this similar study design. Once again, rubrics, open-ended questions. As you can see, they are super complex, right? This vignette was basically about a patient, elderly, post-surgery, had a fall, abnormal heart rhythms. Do you want to start blood thinning medications? I'm going through all this just to give you a sense of how complex it is. But as you can see, I think this was, again, a surprising result. GPT-4 alone did way better, even than doctors, similar to doctors using AI in this instance, but a lot better than doctors using whatever they are using today. And again, this is a huge jump again, right, with this newer reasoning models. This latest paper on the right is undergoing peer review right now. But as you can see, again, with the reasoning models, right, again, significant performance gains. And I don't see this topping out anytime soon. So this graph was really to say, we had a lot of obviously existential, right? Physicians coming to us, all right, crap, now our job is in jeopardy. And one view of thought is that, okay, but doctors, humans, right, we're a lot more empathetic. And I think that there were two studies that were both simulated, right? Basically, a Google study and a sort of JAMA study using Reddit doctor forum question answers, right? Basically letting patients pick. Do you prefer the AI response or do you prefer the sort of doctor response? And almost overwhelmingly, the human respondees prefer the AI chatbot response. And if you think about why, it's because doctors have 5 to 10 limits, right? Like, rural health, we are also constrained by resources. I simply don't have the time to type out a very, very long and detailed response. And I think with a last clip in here, I just wanted to show you, I think.
Hi, I've been feeling really.
Oops. Okay, I'm just going to play a short clip. I'm sure some of you might have seen this AI doctor, not AI doctor, sorry. You might have seen these videos where they are generated purely by Google Veil. And it looks super impressive, right? I've seen videos where someone is basically doing a sort of selfie journal and recording, sort of a Star Wars character, so on and so forth. So I thought, all right, this looks easy. Let me try that. And I was just trying to imagine what, to me, an AI doctor would look like. And for me, how I think this starts is that it's probably going to act at the level of maybe a medical resident, and maybe the patient would walk into the room, interact with this AI chatbot. And I basically got Veil, to write a brief prompt and basically generate it for me. Let's see how it did, because this, to me, it's a bit fun.
Tired lately.
Okay, I see. Let's talk about the plan.
Okay, so maybe you didn't grasp all of it, but there were a lot of flaws in that brief 10 seconds clip, right? People walking through the walls, the wrong audio clip set to the wrong person, so on and so forth. So
Hi.
Let's go to the next one. And we're at time, so this is probably the last slide, and I'll wrap up with thoughts. But I thought, all right, maybe I'm not doing it the right way. Why not use an AI to write a prompt for an AI, right? Like, I said, hey, this is a smart thing to do. So I was very impressed with the prompt they did. They did it Hollywood style. There was an act scene, soft lighting, video camera, and all of that. So I took that prompt, I pasted it in again, and let's see how it did this time, whether it did any better.
Michael Smith.
Michael Smith. Hello, how can I help you today? All right, Michael, let's talk about what the AI has put together.
You can see what happened there, right? Once again, it didn't quite get that I wanted to have an AI doctor resident follow the script throughout, right? Patient interact. It was assigning the script to all different people. So I was like, all right, maybe the third time's a charm. So let's try again. Oops, reached my limit, right? Oh, you didn't see the last slide. I reached the limit. So actually, Veil stops you, I think, after you use too many credits, because these are still quite computationally intense. And I think I use this to demonstrate that even though, lots of these AI technologies are improving quite fast, there are still a lot of nuances and limitations, right, around the parameters. All to say, AI doctor is a really interesting concept, not anytime soon. For the moment, there are going to be a lot of guardrails and more science needed. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. For a moment, I thought that he was actually going to ask me the question. I was like, hey, where's my chat GPT? So I'm Saurabh. I'm the Chief Telehealth Officer at the Center for Telehealth at University of Mississippi Medical Center. Okay, so I'm not used to speaking in the mic, so but you can tell me if you're not able to hear me. So I am the Chief Telehealth Officer at University of Mississippi Medical Center, and so we have been having a great time today listening to these two talks. It will be a difficult act for me to follow. But what I bring today is a little bit of a different flavor. And what I want to start with is I want to talk about our journey and our foray into AI and why did we embark on this journey and why did we thought about AI in the first place. So before I do that, I have no conflicts to report. And I'm going to talk about how we are going to integrate some of the AI into telehealth workflows. Come back to that. But wanted to talk about Mississippi and our Center for Telehealth. Our Center for Telehealth actually provides services to a broad coverage area in Mississippi. We have a vast footprint, and we have 20 plus projects that we have implemented in Mississippi as well as outside Mississippi. And this has been our journey. We have been leaders in telehealth for the more than last 2 decades. And as Sylvia mentioned, we are one of the 2 centers of excellence for telehealth designated by federal agency HRSA. And what I wanted to point out is that, so we have been awarded a lot of these grants and designation by HRSA, but what I wanted to point out is last week, in 2020, last week, we had our name change from Center for Telehealth to Center for Telehealth and Emerging Technologies, because we want to embrace AI and other technologies like digital platforms and see how those can, intersect with telehealth workflows to enhance the value that we are bringing through telehealth. So it's very important for you to understand, why did we embrace it? And I have to go back to the COVID era that everyone is trying to forget. So in 2020, we all know that health services pivoted overnight towards telehealth to provide services, to keep the services running for delivering healthcare. Come 2022, COVID was dissipating. And when we were looking at our data, we were looking at, well, there was a huge uptick in, utilization of telehealth that was then declining, coming down. And well, we thought that let's ask some questions. Let's ask the questions of the clinicians as to why, why there's a decline in the utilization of telehealth. And what we heard from them was that during the COVID era, there was basically no other alternative. Everybody has to pivot. But they felt that, we don't have enough time during these visits to glean all the clinical information that they need to have to make important decisions regarding patients' diagnosis and treatment and management. And so we well thought, like, okay, how can we increase the time? How can we increase, give more time for patients to be engaged? Because engaging patients in person is a challenge. Trying to engage them and get all the clinically relevant information through telehealth audio visit adds a level of complexity. So we thought, how can we do that? So that was one thing. Then the other thing, what happened during COVID, and I think most of you must be aware of it, and I think Jordan had mentioned in his first slide, was workforce shortage. So especially for the nursing staff, there was a rapid turnover of nursing staff. There was a huge burnout, not only for providers, but also for nursing staff, leading to severe nursing shortages, which had domino effect on hospitals not able to provide those services, keep their services running, leading to hospitals being at risk of closure, especially in rural areas. So we thought that what can we do to improve, alleviate this nursing shortage? So I'm going to talk about these two programs here, how we embarked on our journey by first understanding what need is out there and what need is we are trying to bridge. So first I'm going to talk about our AI Scribe program. I think we all know about provider burnout. I've talked to you about provider engagement and patient engagement and lack of it in the audio during the telehealth encounters. So we decided there's a lot of data out there. There's a data out there, some good studies out there showing that AI Scribe works, but they have not been focusing, or those studies have not focused on telehealth and how AI Scribe can be used for telehealth. It's a different thing to have software and when both the patient and the provider are sitting in the same room, and it's an entirely different thing for using an AI Scribe where you are geographically located in different areas. So that was a reason we started on, you put a project together. I'm going to skip some of these. I think there are a lot of technical people out there who already know what AI Scribe does. It uses, large language, natural language processing and other modules to actually convert voice to text. So I'm not going to show this and go through this. So we brought in a number of providers from different specialties. And when I talk about specialties, I'm talking about specialties that actually take a long time in engaging patients and long documentation time. I'm talking about psychiatry. I'm talking about geriatrics. So we engaged some of these providers, understood their challenges, understood what is called the pajama time, how much time they are actually having to put in after the offices are closed from home and trying to, catch up on their documentation and bring up a documentation good enough that they don't get called from the revenue cycle to say, hey, go back and make changes and on your documentation. So we selected these providers who were facing challenges. We've a workflow. We actually investigated and explored a lot of vendors and selected a vendor and embarked on this study. And what we are going to show you is our results. And one of the things that we do is that we want to create and contribute to evidence. So all these studies have, IRB behind them. And so this is an observational study, and I'm going to show you some of the results that we have. So this was, we undertook a survey before and after the implementation of our project, and we showed that there's a trend in higher provider satisfaction with time spent on documentation. So they were reducing the time that was spent on documentation. There was trend towards higher provider satisfaction with the quality of the AI scribe, and higher trends towards they felt that they were spending more, having more engagement with their patients. So I've been shown that, I've been told that there are only 5 minutes left. So I'm going to skip some of my presentation here and move to the next part, which is actually how, and this is really cool. This is really cool because we are trying to enhance our virtual nursing workflows, which already have demonstration great value by bringing in AI. And what we are doing, what is cool about it is that what we are doing at a health system, our academic medical center, simultaneously, we are doing this study in a small critical access hospital with 25 beds, which have a totally different resources available to them to implement AI workflow. And we can talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we face there. But I'm going to talk about our how we enhanced our virtual nursing workflow in the last 2 minutes that I have. So we undertook a pilot program. We put hardware, software to acquire computer vision and see how, and train on how to, and our objective was to prevent patients from falling. So the virtual nursing was already there. They were doing admissions, discharges, patient rounding. The AI component was trying to prevent falls. I'm going to skip all of that. I've been shown the timer again. So what the AI does, the AI actually creates alerts for telesitters. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to capture the movement. They're trying to predict whether the patient is at risk of falling. And based on the movements of the patient, based on the training model, they can say, hey, the alert could be green, caution, or red. If there's a red, then the telesitter goes in and talks to the patient. If they feel like the patient is still not, still there's a high risk of falling, they bring in the bedside nurse. I'm going to skip this and talk about my data. So what this data show is how many times the patients were redirected by the virtual staff, and how many times they asked the bedside to come and intervene. So it was the program was implemented in February, still continuing in July. So far, redirection is more than 2,000 times they have redirected the patients. And the staff have to intervene around 800 times. They had called in the staff to come in and intervene at the bedside. There have been some falls. Most of these falls were when the bedside nurse was there, so there was nothing much that the virtual nurse can do. But here's the data that that is most interesting. Comparing 5 months of data prior to implementation, 5 months after the implementation, there has been a 28% reduction in the number of falls, but more importantly, 67% reduction of falls with harms that we have achieved. So those are our two programs that I wanted to highlight. I also wanted to highlight this, and this is our patient, the employee engagement where we have implemented the virtual nursing program. The virtual nursing program has, the unit that has the virtual nursing program has one of the highest employee engagement in the entire institution. So when we talk about cost, when we talk about who's going to pay for AI, the question that we need to answer moving forward is, can this be just the standard of care that is important for benefiting the patients and actually making sure that your providers increasing their well-being. So I'm going to stop there. I've been told that I have to stop here, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Okay, I'll pass it to Lulu.
There are many questions coming in, but I will pick and choose. What low, reasonable cost solutions exist to keep patient data safe while allowing a small critical access hospital to unlock the power of AI?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Of course. What low/reasonable cost solutions exist to keep patient data safe while allowing a small critical access hospital to unlock the power of AI utilization?
So I don't think there are any that are existing right now. The solutions, the program that was implemented and supported through a grant, and that we are looking into that. But to answer the second question about how critical access hospitals can unlock the power of AI, what I'm going to say, and so when you talk about when we implemented this program at our main academic medical center, there's a telesitter around the clock that is viewing this data. When we go to the small critical access hospital, they cannot afford around the clock telesitter for a 25-bedded hospital. So what we were able to achieve, and this is really remarkable, we were able to convince the nursing staff to actually keep an eye on the monitor in addition to what the job that they are actually doing. And I'm happy to point out that the value that the program brought for the nurses and the care that they're providing and showing the improved outcomes had them embrace that and create this as a part of their workflow. So what I'm trying to point out is that critical access hospital, rural hospitals may not have resources, but they can be innovative and creative in how to come up with solutions that do not cost a whole lot.
Thank you. Should we do one more? All right. Is equipment readiness a barrier to implement AI into clinical workflow, or can you get by with already existing equipment?
Equipment, you have to have a totally different set of equipment for AI, and there are costs attached to it. You have to look into whether they are going to be integrated to the Epic or your EMR. So yeah, I mean, all these AI solutions have expensive equipment behind that. I mean,
yeah, I think what Dr. Chandra said, I think not just the question is asking more about hardware equipment, but most of the costs are to do with things like software and people expertise, meaning to say it's more data infrastructure. And then afterwards, you know, it's then becomes a question of what's a use case, how do you protect the data? Do you want to go for a local model that we can do on-prem, which means buying costly, expensive servers, or more pragmatically, usually what health systems would do is set up some secure way to access LLM API. So for example, at Stanford, we have something called Secure GPT that allows us researchers, as well as operational folks, as well as clinicians, to access large language models and put in PHI. And then you can obviously also build on top of that. But I think that's how I would think about, you know, the new sort of investment in infrastructure, primarily around people as well as the data infrastructure.
I think we'll do one more. All right, so bear with me. AI systems are built on several frameworks that are dependent on large tech ecosystems that could be unreliable, prone to attacks, and have bugs which could cause medical errors and hurt human lives. While tech companies on the effectiveness of their products for sales, shouldn't the user or the doctor be available for liability and responsibility for the patient? Furthermore, the effectiveness of prompt engineering would determine the response given by AI. Who validates this response? Another AI or human discretion? That's a big one.
I'm happy to go first. So the short answer is you always need human experts to validate the AI outputs, right? So whether you look at big tech companies, research setups like Arise, Arise network refers to actually a lot of human physicians, academics, right, to come and design and validate all these outputs. Because the other way just doesn't work, right? I've had tech, engineers come to me and, oh, all right, I use an LLM as a judge, right? For those who are unaware, LLM as a judge is when you tell like what I did, right? Using LLM to create a prompt, right? Seems smart. Use an LLM to say, hey, can you grade in a way of a human doctor all the scores? It works to some degree, but there's a lot of nuances and a reality to one part of the question because there was a multifaceted question. The one part to that is that you always need human experts to validate the AI outputs. I think, what was the earlier part? Lulu, could you repeat the earlier part of the question, please?
The earlier part of the question, let me get right to it.
Oh, it was liability. I feel like there'll probably be, I think one part was liability, right? I feel like Sylvia would have a good discussion then. Was there a third part in there besides liability?
They said, furthermore, the effectiveness of prompt engineering would determine the response given by AI. Who validates this response? Is it another AI or human discretion?
Right. So I would say always start from the final output, right? Because prompt engineering is just one facet. As you could see, my prompt wasn't great, clearly, but there were other parts that were causing the demo I showed on the video, right, to break as well. So you should always start from the use case and how to think about the grading and how to get an expert to come in, even if it's just one person doing a vibe check, right? It could be a pharmacist for selecting the right drugs to do a vibe check, review the outputs. Or in our case, we use a lot of clinicians because the product and use case was a lot more of clinical decision support. So that's where I would start. Don't fixate on just one thing, prompt engineering, because yes, that can go wrong, but a lot of other things could go wrong as well, not least because they are releasing models so fast, right? And so the failure modes tend to change as well. For example, just to illustrate, to make it more real, I think with the last GPT 4.5, there was a lot of syncophancy, meaning they'll reconfirm, right, what you're saying. As GPT 5 tried to address that, but open up other types of issues. Don't know if Dr. Chandra, you want to add on anything? Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Chandra, just one last thing I'd like to call out. Would you like to share with folks some information about some exciting developments from the Center of Excellence and forthcoming possible tools?
Well, as I said, we are trying to solve problems for a rural and underserved population. And I think Jordan mentioned most of them that are applicable. We are in Mississippi, 54% of our population are living in rural areas. We have almost the lowest patient to provider to patient ratio in the entire country. So shortage of providers. And on top of that, one of the highest chronic disease burden in the country. And add to that, the travel distance that patients have to travel to seek care. So one of the most exciting for me, and I think there are many other medical centers who are exploring this as well, is how to provide access to specialists. In my part of the world, it may take several months to be able to see those patients via in person, and also many times scheduling and lack of connectivity, broadband access prohibits audio visits as well. That also depends on digital savviness on part of the patient. So the most exciting thing in my mind that we are taking a look at it is how we can have provider to provider consults, how we can get primary care providers to ask questions of specialists using technology and using actually AI. And we are looking in how, because now what happens right now is primary care provider doesn't have too much time in the office. And if they have to send a question and we ask like, okay, can you give me more information? They're going to send you 50 documents. And then it becomes prohibitive on the part of the specialist to rapidly go and spend time and come up with an answer. So we are trying to use AI and large language model to actually enable that, where the providers can actually send that information to us, and we can give a summary tailored to every specialty. For example, the cardiology, we give them a summary based on the 50 documents. You can read them and provide a concise summary. And I hope that can transform the way we can provide access to specialists in medically underserved areas, and probably can serve as a paradigm for similar medically underserved areas in the country.
Great, thank you both. These was a wonderful presentation. Round of applause. Great. So for the folks online, we're going to go on a 30-minute break. We'll keep the line open. We will go quiet, but we will come back on at the top of the hour. And for our in-person folks, your lunch is behind you. Please make your way as fairly quickly as possible, since we have about 25 minutes, and you can also go outside. So thank you. We'll be back.
Well, hello to all our new friends. I hope everybody had a good chance, whether you're online or in person, to slow down, process some information, ingest some sustenance, and get ready for a brand new afternoon of learning. We're so glad to have you here for our next session of the AI Bootcamp entitled What You Don't Know Can Hurt You, AI and Evolving Regulations. So this session is really about the shifting legal and regulatory landscape for AI in healthcare and the risks that come from both using and potentially from not using AI tools. To help guide us through these complex topics, we've got two experts. Both of them bring deep legal and policy experience to the conversation. They're both JDs, so we've got some credentials in the house, which is very nice. And then I'm going to do a quick introduction for them both, and then we'll get on to the content. First, we're joined by Alia Suleiman, who is leads compliance, privacy, and regulatory affairs at Datavent. Alia is a nationally recognized expert on evolving regulatory landscape around data, interoperability, and AI in healthcare. Before she was at Datavent, she was a partner at McDermott, William, and Emery, and previously served in regulatory leadership roles at Epic and Manifest Medex. She brings a deep understanding of both the legal and technical realities of AI development in healthcare. And we're also joined by Sylvia Trujillo, who is currently the executive director of the California Telehealth Resource Center. I just slipped and said currently because we were all wondering about our funding for a second there, but we're all good. We're all good. Sylvia has spent over 2 decades shaping policy to support the adoption of digital health and create AI-enabled tools or have AI-enabled tools across public and private systems. She has experience at the National Regulatory Strategy with Medicaid reimbursement and provider enablement, and from her leadership at a major health IT organization to her prior work at the American Medical Association. And we are going to get some great perspectives today. They're going to help us unpack what is really a rapidly moving AI regulation and liability landscape. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. Great. A little bit closer. Does that work? Okay, great. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I have given sort of talks about the regulatory landscape for healthcare AI in particular so many times over the last, 2-3 years. Where we stand today as a country in the state of California is a really different place than we've been in the past. And I say that because we've got a brand new federal AI action plan and some AI executive orders that take a really different approach to just AI regulation in this country. With that said, I think we could, I can click here. Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So no conflicts of interest. Okay. So the race to regulate. So just as tech companies are racing to develop the leading foundation model, we have seen over the last few years regulators of all shapes and sizes and jurisdictional overviews racing to develop a rubric for how we judge whether AI is safe, appropriate, fair to use in a particular context. So the squares on this slide represent different layers of oversight that we've seen crop up at the federal, at the state level. And I wanted to call out a couple examples here that sometimes fly under the radar. So number one, when my company at Datavant, we operate in an environment where state laws really matter. So we have an entire team that is dedicated to tracking state legislative policy proposals, bills, sub-regulatory guidance that comes from state health agencies. And what I can tell you is that there has been an over 450% increase in the number of those policies and proposals that describe, touch, or relate to health AI between 2024 and 2025. Some of our legislative sessions are still active, so we'll see if that number increases. All that goes to say that it is clear that states are a hotbed of regulatory and kind of policymaking activity around AI generally, but health AI in particular. And I'll talk a little bit about state law examples of really their approaches to regulating AI, specifically in the healthcare context, a little later on. With that said, there are also sub-regulatory sort of industry association guidances that are also impacting the state law landscape. So, a couple examples. In the health insurance space, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners issued a model bulletin on AI, and that has been adopted by insurance commissioners in 24 jurisdictions and really sets expectations that apply across the insurance industry, but with, that typically applies to health insurers as well, around the responsible use, measurement, and overall, oversight of AI when used in consequential decisions. And that is a buzzword that this group should remember, because there is a tendency in health AI policy and regulatory kind of rulemaking to focus on AI that is high impact or high risk, and consequential decision making is typically the buzzword that's used to differentiate that high risk, high impact AI from other low risk administrative use cases. With that said, we'll talk a little bit about an example of federal rulemaking that doesn't care whether your AI is high risk, low risk, administrative, or clinical. It applies, requirements around transparency, risk management, and governance nonetheless. But on the flip side I talked about the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. There's also the Federation of State Medical Boards. Some of you may be familiar that the Federation of State Medical Boards issued a report in 2024 outlining recommendations for how state medical boards should think about responsible AI in the context of the physicians and clinicians that they license and oversee. And we know that at least one state, the state of Washington, has adopted those recommendations in some form as a part of their medical board kind of oversight procedures. And it is likely to be a key part of future state medical board considerations. And we're seeing state laws give enforcement authority in some cases to state medical and osteopathic boards when it comes to who has the actual permission to enforce fines or create consequences for noncompliance. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is the executive branch sort of executive orders, the federal policy here. The 25-page AI action plan, the 3 executive orders that came out in July, the key theme there is bolster American AI dominance through deregulation. So I think that we are going to see either a softening or in some cases a rescission of federal frameworks in this space, potentially around health AI as well, just given the direction that we're seeing from the federal government. So these slides are going to be available, so I won't spend a ton of time talking about the details on each slide, but I wanted to just showcase an example of this is a federal AI law that applies to a developer of particular AI-enabled technology. So this is a law that was passed back in, 2023, I believe, yes. And with a compliance date, 2024 with a compliance proposed in 2023, finalized in 2024 with an effective compliance date of the end of 2024. And this law applies to AI that's embedded within certified health IT systems. So EHR systems that have gone through the federal certification program such that they can be used for, as a part of Medicare programs, really. And this is one of those laws that doesn't care whether whether the AI embedded or made available in a system is being used for administrative or clinical purposes. It really focuses on the functionality. Is it supporting decision making? Is it based on algorithms? Is it that are trained on training data? And is it producing an output that qualifies as a prediction, classification, recommendation, evaluation, or analysis? Those are some pretty broad nouns, right? So I think we've seen a lot of variable interpretations on how broad this rule could actually be. I've got another slide here that talks about some of the details of that requirement. A totally different example that applies to healthcare organizations is the Section 1557 final rule that really focuses on putting the onus for AI risk management and governance, as well as just ongoing monitoring and oversight on healthcare provider organizations that receive, federal funding. Really, anyone that qualifies as a covered entity, not in the HIPAA meaning, but in the Affordable Care Act meaning. And the key thing I want to highlight here is it applies to patient care decision support tools, which is, again, more clinically focused and administrative and has to have some impact on patient care. But the most interesting thing about this final rule was that it was actually pretty specific on the expectation that healthcare organizations, that the regulators have for healthcare organizations when it comes to assessing risks associated with these patient care decision support tools. These 5 items on the slide here are actual, content from the preamble of the final rule that outlines what healthcare organizations should be doing to assess the intended use, appropriate use, warnings, contraindications, other considerations that may impact the fairness, safety, efficacy, and reliability of these tools. And then what does that, so this is the interactive portion. Does anyone know what you get when you combine these 3 things? Any guesses? State law, that's what you get. So because of the vacuum at the federal level, we've seen, as I mentioned, a huge increase in state laws focused on AI. And I put just 3 examples here on the slide. Not going to go through all of these in details, but wanted to use them to highlight a few themes. So number 1, we see a focus on, again, AI use in consequential decision-making. So that first California law focuses on AI in utilization management and emphasizes the importance of clinician involvement and making kind of an individualized determination about utilization management based on, the factors in someone's clinical record. Again, more applicable to health plans, payviders, right, than providers. The second California law, again, these are both effective as of this year too, so FYI. The second California law is about transparency. That is another key theme that we see in some state legislation. If you're using AI to inform a patient interaction, does the patient know? Might that change how they rely on the output that they are receiving in that interaction? And while the law doesn't take a position on what is an appropriate disclaimer, it certainly indicates when you should have one. And then the final law here, I just think is interesting because it imposes requirements on the use of AI in quote unquote regulated occupations in the state of Utah. What does that mean? That means over 30 different healthcare professions are technically regulated by the Utah law. That is another theme we are seeing, this emphasis on heightened controls for AI when used in regulated occupations. And we have seen a lot of state bills kind of copy and paste that concept from the Utah law into their proposals. And it's just notable because we're talking about impacts on physicians, surgeons, dentists, pharmacists, midwives, behavioral health therapists, you name it, anyone who is sort of licensed by the state. So lots of themes to track there, but I'll pass it on to Sylvia for the juicy stuff.
Well, I don't know if it's juicy, but so I'm going to jump up here. I'm a mover arounder. So I'm going to tether myself here, but I may move around a little bit. So I want to make sure I'm still in frame, but just very quickly, what I want to first emphasize is that we have this framework, and remember there's different applications of AI systems. There's research, there's operations, there's population health, and there's clinical applications, right? Those are 4 different ways you can apply AI systems. And depending on the methods and systems, conditions of deployment, levels of autonomy and functionality, they have varying levels of risk and potential for harm, right? So remember, what they're really trying to do here is address the potential for harm and to make sure that there's informed consent. So I'm going to try a different lens. There's the regulatory environment, and what Alia has laid out are compliance with a regulatory regime. But any clinicians in the room, remind me again, any practicing clinicians? Okay. So as practicing clinicians, you know that there's the compliance of the organization and your compliance as an individual, but you also have liability when there's patient harm. And so I have no conflicts to report. But we do have situations where AI systems have been deployed and harm to patients has occurred. I'm going to focus on one of them. So it's been talked about ad nauseum. Sorry for the folks that have heard this 50,000 times, but we on your right hand side, we had a situation where a company developed an AI tool that was designed to help reduce readmissions. And so it was supposed to help hospitals and clinicians and their care teams identify patients who are at high risk of readmissions and provide them a more intensive set of supports in home. It turns out that the design of the tool was wrong because instead of addressing acuity, it was really evaluating utilization. So they determined that patients who had been high utilizers of health services were higher acuity and that those were the same thing. And so those patients needed more intensive services. Well, that's a great correlation for whether or not you're insured or not. Utilization is a greater function, not necessarily of your acuity, it's a greater correlation of whether you're insured. And so it turned out disproportionately, as we all know, certain communities have lower insurance rates, and as a result, lower utilization. So why does this matter in the liability sense? Somebody figured it out. Some researchers came in and identified the issue. The organization said, yes, we'll address it. But then some investigations were opened up, including in Massachusetts. And the question is, who's liable for that algorithm? Because there were thousands and thousands of patients who did not receive the same level of service, the same level of care. And the immediate answer from the organization was, this was only assistive. The liable parties are the clinicians. And the clinicians said, absolutely not. We did not utilize these tools. The care teams that prepared their discharge prepared it, and in some cases didn't even know about it. So it turns out we have some intersections between liability and regulatory compliance. And so when you think about liability, you have, is it the clinician, is it the health system, or is it the vendor developer? I think most people here today are most interested in, am I the clinician or I the provider liable when there's a bad outcome or a patient is harmed? And so we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but there are different flavors of liability. And a large number of clinicians, it will come as no surprise, are really interested in this professional liability question. So we're going to focus on that, but it's not unrelated to these other levels of liability that may go to other parties. So you may see liability that's shared liability across different entities when there's harm. And Alia touched on this. It's not just physicians. We're seeing all sort of flavor of clinicians that are relying on AI systems and utilizing them. And as she noted, the Federation of State Medical Boards and others have come out and they've said, if you're using these systems as an individual clinician, you are responsible for a duty of care and you are responsible for making sure that this is not going to equal harm. So what does this look like? So we're looking at traditional models of legal liability, med-mal, as many people know about it, medical malpractice. And there's several types of legal standards. One is strict liability and intentional harm or negligence. And we're really focused on negligence because the question is, did you exhibit the standard of care that was necessary to avoid harm? And so what we are now currently seeing is while states are developing new regulatory regimes that could change what the standard of care would look like in any given jurisdiction, they are using traditional standards. And typically, when you look at that, they are evaluating not only did the provider exhibit the standard of care, Was it a support tool or final decision maker? Remember, the very first example today was an autonomous AI system where the developer said, yeah, we're liable for the wrong outcome. So that's an important question to ask developers and vendors. If it's an autonomous AI system, then they should be holding the liability, and that should be part of the discussion. And also, here's this other very burdensome question. AI is supposed to reduce burden, right? Well, now we're starting to see a standard where you're being asked to document the reasoning for accepting or rejecting an AI recommendation. Can you imagine more documentation burden? So here the lawyers are creating like more burden where we're trying to get rid of it. So this is an evolving space as well. So basically, here are some of the questions you want to make sure, and this outlines some of the issues that Alia laid out as well. You want to go through each one of these items and identify whether or not there's someone in your organization, because you have the policies, the procedures, and the personnel who are comprehensively sitting down and tracking if your AI tool is coming into your organization, that you've gone through this checklist. Good news for the California folks, we do have some toolkits. You'll get that at the end of this process, and more will be coming for other participants across the nation. So this is what we've really come to understand, is that over time, there's still some gaps. They're still applying traditional standards of harm and causality. And so, frankly, the burden still remains on patient plaintiff litigants to establish that there was a causal relationship between your use of the AI system and their harm, or alternatively, the harm was proximately caused by your lack of use of AI. And quite frankly, as challenging as medical liability is and costly liability insurance, the reality is that these are claims that are still a very, very small percentage of overall services that have been provided. But it is something that you have to keep in mind. I'm not going to go through the state laws. Alia called those out. I just want to finish really with us focusing on the key takeaways. So when you're using AI, you cannot go on autopilot. So lots of studies show that we are a bit a technology chauvinist, that we tend to want to rely more on a machine's output than we would rely on an expert colleague's decision making. So we have to really combat around our desire to default to rely on machine output or AI systems. The idea of why you didn't follow an AI tool's decision output. This is something you need to think about in terms of your policies and procedures. And I don't know that we've arrived at that state yet. Alia, that might be a great question for you to answer. But really fundamentally, you should be asking, and we do have a vendor checklist that we'll have available for you all at the end of this. You need to ask really basic questions around the validation and training data and whether it's appropriate for your patient population and your conditions of deployment, and several other key questions. And then to Alia's point, every single one of the states of the folks across the nation who are online, there are bills in your state on AI in general, and certainly those that touched on AI. And if you're here in California, we have a chock full, and we'll be reporting out on that. So once again, responsible use really is what protects you more than avoidance, and that's important to remember. So
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. So now we are going to move into some Q&A time. We've got two questions kind of preceded from some of our other speakers, and I'll go ahead and just read those out, but then we will be taking questions from the chat and then from in-room as well. So we just kind of prep yourself. If you've got questions, get those lined up, get those in your head. Our first question comes from Dr. Chandra, who we heard from earlier today. And he asks, given the black box nature of many AI models in healthcare, how can regulatory frameworks ensure that clinicians and patients can trust and verify AI-driven decisions without compromising proprietary algorithms?
I'm happy to take this one. So I think the key thing that is sort of has to be the driver of any AI deployment or implementation or work with a particular vendor is having a really crisp definition of what is the problem we are trying to solve with this tool, and ensuring that you are fully aligned with your partners, whether that's the vendor that may have developed the tool or your deployment partners internally within your organization, that we are all aligned on the problem to solve and that this tool is appropriate to do so. That's step one. Step two is that between some of the sub-regulatory guidance that's come out, also that ONC ASTP predictive decision support intervention framework, there's general alignment on key information about intended use, sort of training data, sort of the underlying kind of functionality of a model, performance and accuracy measures that the industry and regulators in some cases have already coalesced around as kind of core information to know about a model before you make a decision on how and where and how broadly to deploy something. So one of the great things that someone in this room has helped develop is a nutritional facts label for Health AI. There are some great examples of how that nutritional facts label can actually be adapted to address some of the performance feedback configuration options and sort of transparency requirements in that federal predictive decision support intervention framework. So that's a great example of hey, vendor, can you fill this out? Because there's a lot of information you can glean from that level of summary that doesn't trip into, okay, now we're getting into proprietary IP that the vendor isn't comfortable sharing with you. Even for administrative models, and I've implemented this at my own company, a lot of the AI we deploy is truly like administrative in nature. So one of the services we provide is supporting the release of information function. And a combination of a trained LLM plus optical character recognition models is super helpful for interpreting a faxed record request and mapping data elements to a field in our automated fulfillment system so that it could then be processed digitally through APIs. It is a very low risk model, right? Like it is a low risk use case that is about automating an administrative workflow, but we've still been able to work with our software engineering and data science teams to do a lightweight nutritional facts label that focuses on things like model functionality, the types of documents and request types that the model was trained on, performance and accuracy measures, and we refresh that on an ongoing basis. So I think that is like really a baseline expectation at this point that any vendor or developer operating the space should be able to articulate to you without, tripping over that, well, you're asking for my IP kind of counter argument.
So I'm not going to disagree, but I want to make sure we're all in the same place. How many folks are familiar with this concept of a nutritional label for AI tools? Okay. So everyone in here is familiar with the nutritional labels for food. So I want you to imagine that in your head. Now, that's standardized disclosures of things like protein level, carbohydrate, sugars,
total fats.
Yeah, sodium, right? It's all standard, it's all the same, and it's across all foods. Now, imagine this same type of label for AI tools with elements that distills key pieces of information that help you decide whether or not you and your staff and your patient should be consuming that tool. It may actually lack nutritional value for your patient population, your team, because the data developed to train the tool was not data representative of your patient population. And there's a host of other factors that are disclosed within that nutritional tool. And we're going to have the folks that created that tool as our last panelist who can touch upon this, and it has been widely cited by federal regulators, and it is referenced by my organization and many others as essentially something we need to normalize and distribute. And in fact, is the bare minimum that your vendor should be sharing with you. And if they do not, that is an opportunity for you to say, this looks like AI snake oil, and we're just gonna keep it going. Okay.
No, great responses. We're going to ask, Dr. Sendek, who we'll be hearing from later today, asked a question. And his question is, when AI tools contribute to a clinical error, how should responsibility be assigned among the clinician, healthcare institution, AI developer, and what legal or regulatory guidance should define this accountability?
I'm happy to start, and we'll pass it on to you, Sylvia. But the reality is that a lot of this is handled contractually. That is the reality. So for anyone who has a contract with an electronic health record company, you will likely be familiar with concepts that, essentially say that you're being licensed software, but that ultimate configuration, decisions, deployment, and overall training and use of the tool pursuant to clinical and professional judgment sort of rests with you. Sylvia mentioned some theories of liability, like products liability, that have been playing out in courts for years. But the reality is that establishing standing to actually hold software developers, SaaS companies accountable, has not been very common. And part of the challenge is that products liability frameworks were intended to deal with products like a defective seatbelt, or you find a nail in your can of tuna, right? Not software, which has typically been considered more of a service in the kind of litigation to date. So with all that said, the contractual terms will typically spell out like who's actually liable for that error. It is most likely going to be a healthcare organization. And there are types of insurance now and riders for insurance policies I've seen in the cyber liability space that are evolving to account for AI related risks. So it is worth, if you are involved at all or simply curious about your organization's insurance profile, it is worth asking whether AI related questions are cropping up when renewal time comes along, because that is definitely a trend that I've seen. So it's a risk. The liability definitely sits more with the deploying organization and clinicians as a result, but it is an insurable risk, at least right now.
Yeah, so we're sort of switching. We went from regulatory compliance and traditional medical liability, and now we're flipping our answers, because I'm going to talk about not just, I thought that was fantastic because it does address organizational liability. And I think oftentimes establishing traditional medical liability still remains, for people in this room, this is fairly good news. It's still very challenging. For patients, for all of us as patients, not such great news, and particularly for vulnerable patients. So what I would say is that along with the ability to contract, or the need to contract, liability distribution, as well as contracting and expanding on your insurance, you also need to make reasonable investments in workforce upskilling and training, because the failure to do so, that in itself can be liability, both in terms of contributing to more traditional medical liability and adverse events, because the tools are coming. They're embedded in EHRs. There are operational uses of AI systems that may not result in medical liability, but can create regulatory liability and compliance challenges. But one of the most important ways to mitigate your risk is doing what you're doing right now, which is bringing along as many individuals within your organization to understand the fundamentals and to have policies and procedures. As someone in the back mentioned, the first question you should ask whenever you're deploying these tools are, what are the policies, the procedures? And I have one more P in there: policies, procedures, and people. What upskilling and training have you ensured on a consistent basis? And that's where we're here to help. And that's actually going to be a great segue, potentially, if we're at time, to our next panel.
Yeah, can we get a time check real quick? 5 minutes? Okay.
Keep it going.
Let's take a couple more questions. So I'd like to take just a couple questions here. We got one there from Dr. Sendek.
So I forgot that I submitted that question in the form, but this is something that's come up more recently that I found striking. So we're talking a lot with organizations right now about how they evaluate AI tools internally before implementing them into clinical workflows. And we were having a conversation with a very senior chief AI officer of a very large health system. And we were asking about retrospective validations, which in my experience at Duke was like always a default that we would start with, of let's run the algorithm on retrospective data, see how things worked. In this context, a lot of their AI implementations had been in the imaging realm. And in imaging, it turns out there's a very strong pushback against retrospective evaluation of algorithms because of professional liability if positive findings are found that were missed. And organizationally now, they generally don't endorse retrospective validations of algorithms because of this liability question. So they just want to move to prospective assessments, which like is counterintuitive, because you're like, so let's put future patients potentially in harm's way to CYA on like prior care delivered. So I mean, you're both lawyers. Like, tell me what's going on. Like, how do we fix that?
So I think that the liability risk that you're highlighting is very real. And I have encountered very few organizations that on using identifiable data are comfortable doing that sort of retrospective analysis because of this question of you figure out that a mistake was made or something was missed. How do you report that from a patient safety perspective? So this is an area where I actually think that de-identified data is key and changes the risk profile for an organization when performing that sort of retrospective evaluation. Not a great answer, again, if you're a patient whose image had a pixel that would be interpreted differently by an algorithm than a clinician. Like, again, so like this is my purely like legal answer, but the reality is that if you de-identify that data, you can use the expert determination method under HIPAA. You can retain data utility in many cases, including for images, without rendering that information identifiable. Use that for your retrospective analysis. It doesn't present the same risk of like, okay, I found something off. Do I have an obligation to intervene? Because the whole point of de-identification is that you have a very small risk or ability to map that data back to an identifiable human. So you get the benefit of the the performance indicators and accuracy data without creating that same issue. But that might not work for every model and every use case.
So I don't have anything to add to that, but I do have a question for our online participants. Please throw your answers into the question and answer, and for the folks here. Does the discussion of liability feel so daunting that it brings you up to think, I don't know if I want to do this? By a show of hands. Okay. So that's a surprisingly low number of people, because oftentimes, what's that? I think oftentimes the complexity of the both regulatory and medical liability issues can be a full stop for organizations. I don't know what our online responses are, but what I will say,
There's
There.
a lot of yeses, all caps, exclamation point.
okay.
Be a
So
good use for emojis too.
yes. So what I will say is remember why we're here. The reason we're here is that there are shrinking resources, there is growing demand, high rates of burnout, and the error rates in our medical system are one of the, if it's not the leading cause of death and harm, it's one of the leading causes. So with fewer people, because birth rates are leveling out and dropping in some places, with an aging population and medical knowledge being generated at a rate unprecedented in history. So a human actually could not synthesize all of the information that the time when clinicians can do that, I think it's like over a decade ago. Like the amount of knowledge generated every week is so high volume that even the most conscientious clinician could not absorb it and apply it to clinical practice responsibly. So if you feel super daunted, just remember these are powerful tools for good, but they also can be powerful tools for harm at scale. And so it's activities like this that can really mitigate risk and harm and drive tremendous opportunity. So to the folks online, just remember this is worth it. We just have to figure out how to do it. And there's going to be a lot of people with you to do that.
And on that bombshell, yeah, I know my brain elasticity is being stretched. I'm feeling it. So, but we are going to gear up for our next session. I do think we need to kind of move on. So we're going to get ready, and we have some speakers to come up. Just a minute to reset here, and then we'll get going on our last session of the day. Very good. So good. All right, we're going to give it about 30 seconds more, and we're going to get started. So for those of you online who are checking your news stories, wrap that up. For those of you in the room grabbing a drink, wrap that up as well. We're going to be going here in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to get going on our last session here. And I want to thank everybody for being here, being present online and in person. So this is our culminating session. It's called Next Steps, being a healthcare AI ambassador for responsible use. We really hope this session turns what you've learned into action. So I've been stretched. I think we've all been stretched. We're getting a lot of meat. How do we take that back to our organizations? So we're incredibly fortunate to close today with two national leaders from AI Health Partnership at Duke University. First, we're joined by Alifia Hassan, who's an MBA, and she is the Innovation Portfolio Manager at the Duke Institute for Health Innovation. Alifia coordinates major national initiatives like the Health AI Partnerships and its groundbreaking practice network, which supports safety net organizations, including community health centers and critical access hospitals, in navigating real world opportunities and risks of AI adoption. So she has both, she brings a lot of technical and clinical research experience to her work, and her focus is on making AI safe, effective, and practical for teams on the ground. Joining her, we also have Dr. Mark Sandek, who's an MPP and he is the population health and data sciences lead at Duke. He leads an interdisciplinary team of clinicians and data scientists to build, test, and scale AI tools that solve real clinical problems, from inpatient deterioration to chronic disease management. He's had a lot of publications in a wide variety of formats. He's advised national bodies like the AMA, the White House, OSTP, and most recently testified before the US Senate on AI in healthcare. He also co-leads the Health AI Partnership, working to ensure AI tools are integrated responsibly across diverse care settings. That's enough talking from me. We're going to let you guys get back into the meat of how to be ambassadors of AI.
Thank you. And thank you, Sylvia and the CalTRC team for inviting us. It's a privilege to be here and to continue partnering with you. So I didn't get my disclaimers in time. I do have conflicts of interest. I'm an inventor of software licensed from Duke there's about 4 or 5 companies, including Cohere Med, Keela Health, Vega Health, and Clinetic and Full Steam. So we've built a lot of things over the years that we have tried over the years also to kind of commercialize. So I'm here presenting with my colleague Alifia. We've been very fortunate over the years to both be ambassadors of AI implementation within Duke through kind of the main hats that we wear at the Duke Institute for Health Innovation, and then in safety net settings at a national level through Health AI Partnership. So these are the topics that we're going to go through today. I'm going to be handing off to Alifia when we start going through the responsible AI adoption pathway, where we're going to highlight kind of very specifically what you all can do within your organizations to go through the AI product lifecycle. So I don't think I have to motivate this. I imagine everyone in this room wants to make the most responsible use of emerging technologies. So I know Sylvia was just mentioning this beforehand, but I think it was just within the last 6 to 12 months that the number of FDA-approved AI devices has surpassed 1,000. I do want to highlight the speaker from earlier this morning. Really, Michael Abramoff kind of paved the way for a lot of these innovators to get regulatory clearance as medical devices. We see a growing kind of number of use cases that are getting validated in practice that have positive impact on clinical outcomes, on workforce burden, on efficiency, on access to diagnosis and screening. We also see a lot of cases where AI is not having the most positive impact. Sylvia mentioned beforehand the use case of it was Optum building a kind of a risk prediction model for care management that was modeling cost instead of acuity of care. And then we also see growing unease and uncertainty amongst patients around how AI is used in their care. So we're here to try to help folks who want to bring emerging technologies into their care setting. And What I like about this too is it really reflects the way that we do innovation within Duke at the Duke Institute for Health Innovation. So want to emphasize that bringing AI into your organization should always center around some problem or opportunity to improve patient care. So for us, a lot of the projects that we work on are driven by frontline clinicians who actually submit to be able to work with us to do implementations of emerging technologies. And we also just encourage you all, as you go back to your organizations, keep an ear to the ground of what the clinical problems are that you're facing that AI may be able to solve, but always be trying to ground it in what is the problem you're trying to solve. Second is, and I really view this as kind of part of the culture of the practice of medicine. So much of how medicine and medical training happens in the world is this peer-to-peer network and training and apprenticeship model. And we've really leaned into that with all of our work in Health AI Partnership. I was telling someone earlier that for me, a long time inspiration of the work that we're doing is also Project Echo, extension of community health outcomes. And we just have seen over the years many examples of experts who make themselves available to train and provide support to other individuals practicing in lower resource settings who may not have that expertise in-house. So, of course. Yeah, so, oh, sorry, this is so much louder. Could people not hear me at all before? It like wasn't working. Okay. But yeah, we have started to create these communication channels through Health AI Partnership. We have a monthly event. And I know, Jen, we've talked with people who are trying to build these networks locally too. So I think Cal TRC, the TRC network, the HCCN network, it's going to play a big role in helping build these capabilities. And then lastly, you can go to our website, you can go to Cal TRC. They have their own kind of playbook and handbook, lots of these implementation guides. Okay, so how did we even get started to think about this? So I like to tell people the story of we were doing this work at Duke. Sylvia was really one of the first ones to start kind of pushing us to say, okay, like, so you're doing this in the ivory tower. How do you get this out of the ivory tower? But we were also very fortunate to interact with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, who saw what we were doing, and they gave us a charge for, okay, how do we scale this? How do we scale these capabilities at a national level? So the mission of what we started and what today is Health AI Partnership is to empower professionals within healthcare settings to use AI safely, effectively, and ethically through these community-informed, up-to-date practices. So really trying to bring the best practices from the ground up. We want to be the trusted partner, and we also know that for this to scale, we have to do this through partnerships. And then when we think about how we want to use the technology, we want it to eliminate the digital divide, improve patient care, improve the workplace. And going back to that peer-to-peer advocacy, we really believe that communities of practitioners are going to help scale the capabilities. We've been very fortunate over the last 3 to 4 years to build this network. We have many of the best leading health systems that have been kind of at the forefront of developing and implementing AI into clinical care. But then we also launched this last year what we call the Practice Network, where we have 4 federally qualified health centers and 1 community hospital system that are going through one of their first enterprise procurements and implementations of AI. So we are kind of a different player in this space. We're based at a university at Duke. We try to amplify voices and diverse voices. So from the beginning, when the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation gave us this award, they emphasized this can't be for the Dukes and Mayos of the world. That's not mainstream healthcare in America. We really have to create resources that are broadly applicable. We need this to be grounded in the practice of what's going on in the world. Like, you'll see a lot of the things that we try to do is, even though you may go to our website and be intimidated because we're comprehensive, we also try to highlight here's what it looks like when people actually do these things. AI is very interdisciplinary. And I would say this is one of our big challenges, actually. Most of these peer networks in healthcare are kind of very siloed along professional roles where you have medical societies, you have nursing societies, you have a HEMA for health information management. The reality, though, is making decisions around how to use AI within your organization will require close collaboration between clinical, technical, and operational leaders. So we try to really kind of speak to all of those different roles. We provide kind of direct assistance to organizations looking to implement these technologies. And we've done this so far in a single cohort, but are looking to build capabilities for future cohorts as well. And then lastly, I would say not necessarily our priority going into this, but what we have found is, and Alia pointed this out, you have this gap right now at the federal level. You see a lot of activity in the state level. And I would say there has not been enough concrete planning for national level technical assistance and capacity building. I think this TRC consortia is as good of an example as any that I've seen of how do we actually do something effective at the national level that's coordinated. But we've had to kind of be a voice really emphasizing that we need to be convening and collaborating. So this will be my last slide. I just want to highlight a few of the examples. These are all publicly available. I think one of the things I'm going to highlight is not yet publicly available, but it will be publicly available the next month or so. So we have 8 key decision points that go across the AI product lifecycle. Alifia is going to go into more detail on these. We developed the health equity across the AI lifecycle framework. This was really at the peak of kind of 2023, 2024, leading up to that Office of Civil Rights rule that Alia mentioned, where healthcare providers are now liable for discrimination that results from the use of AI. So a lot of health systems have been trying to figure out, well, how do I minimize the risk of discrimination from the use of AI? And we convened folks to really kind of get at that. We developed the original label for healthcare uses of AI in 2020. We've updated that. This is publicly available. And then the last piece is we have a vendor disclosure framework that we built with 3 leading health systems that had developed their own for all their external procurement. And then we now have a consensus document that we're going to be posting a preprint to in the next month or so.
Thanks. Thank you. And in the next phase of this presentation, what I will do is we wanted make when they're implementing and adopting AI solutions in clinical practice. So I'll go through this framework one by one and call out what are the actions you can take and what are the questions you should ask at each stage, and give examples on what can that look like in a real world solution. So using AI Scribe as an example. So first is in the procurement stage is identify and prioritize a problem. So over here, what you're looking at is you're trying to identify and prioritize clinical, operational, and administrative needs. So this has been a common theme in the presentations we've seen throughout the day, where you start with what is the problem, and the questions you can ask over here is what are the challenges in our daily practice? Is it a high priority? Can this be solved by AI? An example, for example, when you're implementing AI Scribe is what surfaces is chart writing is a very big issue. It causes a lot of burnout, and it is an addressable challenge through use of AI. The second key decision point is define AI scope and intended use. So this is really important, where once you identify a problem, you define where can that problem be solved with this tool and define the scope of use. So clearly define the intended use and scope of that AI tool. So what is the function of this AI tool? Will it listen to just this conversation? Will it have some other history that it also takes into account? What are the indications or contraindications and context for the use of AI tool? Should it be used in all kinds of outpatient clinic visits, or should it only be used in adult primary care visits? Will it work in the same way when doing behavioral health visits and pediatric visits or not? So example would be, we need this ambient scribe to record outpatient primary care adult visits and counter and summarize those into clinical notes, because the way it performs in those visits may look very different in the way it performs in pediatric visits. Then the third is develop success measures. So in this decision point, you're trying to establish clear definitions of success for AI adaptation and identify key performance metrics. So then once you have decided that this is the tool, this is the problem I need to solve, this is where I will solve it, you have to figure out, how do I make sure that this is working well? So you define what success looks like and clearly, and what are clinically important and relevant evaluation metric. And you start to track those at the baseline, and then you start to compare it when you're using it within the AI's tool. So for example, we need to evaluate the accuracy, comprehensiveness, and time efficiency of the ambient scribe. So you try to figure out, okay, what does that look like, and what percentage of accuracy is good, and when do I figure out that this is working well or not working well? Then the fourth decision point in development and adaptation is design AI solution workflow. So then you start mapping out how the AI tool will integrate into the workflow, identify stakeholder, and optimize workflow. So you try to identify who's going to use it, who's going to be responsible, and where should it be used. How are providers using it? What's the existing workflow, and how the tool influences it? So for example, before, the provider would write the clinical notes during the visit or after the visit, but with the use of AI tool, is it recording and then summarizing the tool and directly posting it in the EHR system? Or is it a separate system outside where the clinician has to copy and paste and put it in the note and then approve it? So is it adding to the work burden? Is it removing to the work burden? And you have to think through those questions. The fifth decision point is generate evidence of safety, efficacy, and equity. So in this, the action you're trying to take is collect and analyze data to demonstrate AI tools' safety, efficacy, fairness across all population. So the questions you're probably asking is, how good is AI performing? Any subgroup differences or bias in performance? Can providers validate performance? For example, in this, you would examine if the AI tool performs more poorly for non-English speakers versus for patients with strong accents. And you're trying to map out, does it perform across the board well for my patient population or not? I'll move a little faster. I got a 5-minute sign, but we'll try to get through this. Sixth decision point under integration. So now, once you're done development and adaptation, you're moving into integration, and you're trying to figure out, how do I execute? And this means rolling out with education, training, and structured change management. So you need to figure out how will this work in real world setting? Who needs to change their workflow, and how do I educate them? So example would be it may perform really well in clinic A because there was already a staff buy-in, there was clinical champion, but may not perform in another clinic where you've not worked on creating that staff buy-in and education. In the last life cycle phase is where we sort of monitor once the AI is in use. So for example, in this decision point, the actions you're taking is the success metrics that you had decided before. You're trying to track them and see if it is meeting those success metrics. And then the questions you're asking is, are they shifting over time? Is it performing better, worse? Do I need to change anything? And the continuous improvement in documentation efficiency after implementation could be an example, right? Like you'd see times of documentation time spent on documentation reduced significantly post-use. And the last is update or decommission AI solution. So this means where you're trying to figure out, after tracking performance, do I need to decommission, is the performance shifting, or do I need to upgrade because there's better versions of the tools available? So over here, again, you're trying to track metrics, and then you are deciding when do you have to sunset the tool if it doesn't meet the performance metrics determined. Okay, so this is like a QR code for the 8 key decision point framework handout that went through all those 8 points. And Mark will distribute few hard copies that we have here as well. And this is, if you want to go through details, then this is our QR code on the website where it tracks out 31 best practice guides under each of these 8 key decision points. Sylvia, are we good on time? Are you good on time or should we? Okay, sorry. In the next phase, I just wanted to bring that 8 key decision points to life by showing you some of the real world implementation of those steps. So let's go through why we track those 8 key decision points and why we wanted to what we saw as we were building the network. I think what we saw was there's a lot of AI readiness gap across institutions. So that question about how do you bring this out of ivory tower and bring it to real world settings in safety net and low resource setting. So what we saw is that there's lots of capacity gap. Guidelines are usually built with resources and with resources of a high resource setting in mind, which is not translate into real world setting. Inputs from the frontline innovators is really important. You know the problem best in the ground level, so we need to make sure we account for that. AI digital divide is real, and without targeted investment and creating collaborations, we may exacerbate already existing digital divides. And then we have to build implementation pathway, and that requires infrastructure, training, expert access, and peer learning networks. With that in mind, we established the practice network, which is like the first implementation assistance program, where we recruited 4 FQs and 1 community hospital. They identified their own use case and their own problem and joined the program to walk through the 8 key decision point, and we in a 12-month-long program. So I'll just go through a very quick case study, and Jen Cortez, Dr. Cortez from North Country Healthcare and Arizona is here with us. So we'll just talk through what steps they took. So for identified problem, they identified documentation quality gaps. So they want documentation burden was a big thing. And they also wanted to make sure that they upskill their staff on basic AI education and implementation. How do you integrate AI in clinical care? In defined scope and use, we agreed upon ambient scribe. That's what they wanted to implement. And then we helped them with coordinated vendor assessment and selection, scoped out initial validation and pilot implementation plan. In development success measures, we figured out what is the key performance indicator they would track, node quality, satisfaction, usage, and under these categories, we defined what would be the metrics they should track and how do you collect baseline data, and we helped create surveys to collect those baseline data as well. Then we helped design a workflow, which is create AI basic one-pagers to figure out what would the workflow look like, integrated into documentation flow, and clearly define the role of AI in the use. In 5th, generated evidence. I think they're right now at 5th and 6th key decision point where they're running a small limited pilot and generating evidence and getting feedback from the early users. And hopefully in the next few months, they would start monitoring the solution, and then they would figure out when do they scale and update it, or either depending on resources and other things, plan to decommission or not continue or continue, right? Okay, so key learnings and future directions. So there are lots of challenges that have been highlighted throughout the day, and how do we change those challenges or create opportunities from them? So first is foundational capacity gaps. We need collective understanding of different types of tools, like how do you do vendor assessment? How do you do patient disclosures? And the opportunity for that is we need to create collaborations and collective networks where we can solve those issues together and learn from each other. There's limited specialized expertise. We've talked throughout the day that there needs to be an ethics expertise, there needs to be legal challenges, there's lots of contractual information that needs to be available. And we need to have, not all institutions will have those expertise. So we need to partner with ecosystem players by networks so that we can solve some of those problems collectively. AI governance systems, clear structure for oversight and accountability. That we need, we heard about lack of federal regulation and a lot of disjointed state regulation. So we need common frameworks of how do we set up local governance and scale those processes too. And then there's obviously resource constraints. So there's limited funding, Medicare cuts are coming, Medicaid cuts are coming. So sustainable financial and technical support, we'd have to stand up some of those technical teams. So I think what we need to do is collective advocacy for public and philanthropic funding too. So what can we do? So get involved and lead the change. You can join learning networks. You can engage in learning, which is already what you're doing here today. You can get involved in pilots, and within your organizations, you can champion adoption conversations too. You can ask about what are the strategies, how do we create readiness, how do we ensure continuous improvement. And with that, hopefully you join. This is the QR code to check out our website and join our newsletter if you're interested. And thank you. I'll take the same questions.
All right. Things just keep getting better and better. All right. We're going to do some questions now. I think we have some time for questions. I have a microphone, so I'm going to use this opportunity to ask my question first because I have the microphone. One of the things I think you kind of talked to a little bit, but I'd like to maybe ask more pointedly is, coming from a telehealth perspective, we had a lot of issues building provider trust in the system and patient trust in the telehealth system. And I see that as a big question for AI too. How do we build provider and patient trust in these AI systems in a reasonable way? Just so that there's a good level of skepticism, but like, how do we get providers and patients on board? Oh, here's a button. There.
Yeah. The world has also changed in the last like 2 to 3 years. So when we actually launched Health AI Partnership, I'm trying to remember the exact date. I think it was like March or April of 22. And then of course, ChatGPT came out in September of that year. I would say that, so we used to have all these debates about explainability and interpretability, and like, for provider trust and clinicians, did they need to know the weight of a coefficient associated with a specific input? And now we use language models with billions of parameters, like many people on a daily basis. So it's just, I think we're kind of at a point where the expectation is that these tools create efficiencies, even if that's not realized yet. So a lot of, I think, what we are trying to do is equip people to scrutinize, but psychologically, I think the expectations around AI are so different today than they were in 2022, where people were going to, in some ways, I would say, think much more logically about how these systems perform. Now, like GPT-5 comes out and it's like treating cancer. Yeah.
And a lot of that's based on experiences people have actually had. So it's like something that they know.
No, I'm literally making a joke out of like Sam Altman's announcement.
Yeah.
Of like bringing a woman with cancer and like use this for your healthcare.
All right. The online group got a little short shrift last time, so I want to start with them. Do we have some questions from the online chat?
We sure do. All right. How can a healthcare organization assess its readiness to implement AI use cases, particularly more complex ones, by evaluating whether the right processes, policies, and people are in place? Are there any industry recognized frameworks or best practices available to guide this readiness assessment?
Well, we think about that a lot at Health AI Partnership too. And one of the framework that was not on that product slide because it's still under development and we want to do like more intensive interviews with health systems is our governance framework, where we try to map out people, process, technology, and operation systems and needs that, so sort of like infrastructure that you have to stand up within organization. And what does that look like from the AMC perspective? So we want to interview AMCs to FQHCs within the network and outside the network also to understand what are they doing and what are the best practices and how do you set up that minimum governance to make sure that you're ready to implement those AI tools and manage and monitor them responsibly. We did one project with a Canadian hospital system to help stand up their AI policy, where we did similar design workshops to understand their organizational characteristic, their context, what they have already existing. So a lot of times what is happening is they're modifying the existing governance or IT, health IT governance frameworks and adding AI information and questions in that. That's what we're seeing. But yes, that's a common question, is like, how do you make sure that you're ready? And I think the first thing is like, start looking for the communities around you through your HCCNs or telehealth centers or other places where you can participate in pilots. And yeah, anything you'd like?
I was thinking more about your question right before, and this is, I know I can't see Sylvia, but Sylvia or Alia, I would love your sense here too. The idea of trust, in that I would say I'm pretty concerned at the erosion of a lot of prior norms. So like this woman from Stanford, Roxana Danishchu, she just published a paper about when you're using these large language models, the rate at which you're hitting medical disclaimers of like, I'm not going to give you medical advice is going down with like every new version that's getting released. So it's like we're peeling away the norms of like what is a medical device. And then you have like this big controversy that's playing out in public between WHOOP and FDA of like, is this wearable a device that does heart rate? And so like, I just think like historically we would fall back on, oh, there's well-established regulatory regimes around how we classify these things. Whereas now I don't even see those lines holding up in the same way that they used to. So I'm pretty concerned about what that means for how frontline clinicians are going to build trust in these systems.
Is it okay if I ask another question?
Go ahead. Let's go to another online question.
All right. Would the providers always have time to validate AI? And how long would it take to ensure the accuracy and validity of AI once it has been established?
No.
Yeah.
Y'all have plenty of time, right?
What's the solution, Mark?
No, so I mean, part of what's challenging, and even, I mean, so we talked about like the label and the idea of showing performance data. One of the challenges, and I know we ran into this with Ochin, is even if you're the member of a collaborative and you pool resources to have an EHR instance, what a single clinic still wants to know is, how does this perform for my patients in my clinic, in my geography? So you do run into this constraint of you want as local, when I say you, this is like the decision maker for a clinic or a hospital is always going to want to make decisions with as local of data as they can get. But what that means is that there has to be capabilities in that context to generate that local data. And there today, those are constrained resources. So we're trying to think creatively about how do we scale that capability to be able to do evaluation and monitoring in every context. But it's not currently kind of the status quo. And it's a huge part of the digital divide, where if you see who is able to evaluate and monitor internally versus who isn't, it's like the big research institutions.
Yeah, and that gets into the question of like you want those large data sets to have something to chew so you can get the outputs that you need. But you know, those large data sets are large data sets and not the small communities that we hopefully are trying to serve. Let's go to another online question, and then we'll probably open it for a couple in the room.
Give me 1 second here. All right. What tips do you recommend for vetting AI vendors?
Vetting.
For vetting.
Well, hopefully our AI vendor disclosure framework would be released in the next month. It's just going through internal review process, but I think it defines 5 domains of like how do you engage vendors and into like what kind of questions do you ask in those domains. So like for system performance, like what are the different questions you should be asking, and what kind of responses should you be getting back from the vendors. And I think two domains that we specifically call out is like what does the implementation and post deployment responsibility spectrum look like? So what is the total cost of ownership? Who has liability for what pieces within the vendors, and what kind of questions you ask on those frameworks? And what is like the data stewardship look like? So who owns the data that is given to that AI system? What is the secondary use of data? And defining some of those questions and answers as well. So hopefully that will address some of those questions too. Yeah.
Excellent resources. Yeah.
And I do think ours even builds off of CalTRC's has one online today. I don't, what's it called? If
Folks are going to find out. So when we wrap for the California only activity, we'll be sharing that. But the TRCs also are working on some products. And I think there's some extraordinary synergies that were born here today amongst the Health AI Partnership, the TRCs, and the HCCNs.
Awesome.
Could I ask one more quick question? Yeah? Okay. Hopefully it's quick. Do any of the speakers or hosts have any insights on how smaller organizations could secure funding to implement AI?
Do anybody have ideas here? Yeah.
I know that there are, I know of one organization, but there is one organization that we know of that has been working with Kaiser Permanente. It is part of the research study where they were looking at how can they effectively diagnose, but there are these like community benefits offices that exist in different hospital systems. So here, Cedars-Sinai has a benefits office. So it's really looking at what is it that you're trying to solve and how can you leverage these technologies and be able to do the pilot. But you know more information on that than I do.
Yeah, so I think what Elkin was mentioning is the Aim High initiative from Kaiser Permanente. That was also, I think, funded from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, where they gave out grants to FQ. They included 2 FQHCs, but the grants to do testing and implementation of AI tools. We are also tracking to see for our practice network as well, how do we scale that practice network effort and trying to partner with state and local associations, primary care associations, as well as like foundations to do some philanthropic support, and also tracking if there are any federal funding support. But it looks like Dr. Chandra has something to add as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very timely question because within the big and beautiful bill, there is a rural health transformation program that has allocated almost $50 billion for the 50 states. And within that, they are seeking, applications for AI and other emerging technologies on how AI can transform rural healthcare. So small entities that are part of, serving rural areas, underserved areas, there's an opportunity to apply. And that funding, I think, is going to be starting in 2026, going all the way till 2030. So, for example, in Mississippi, the Department of Medicaid has put out a survey, and they are looking for how their stakeholders around the state are thinking about AI and emerging technology. So I think that is true for all the states.
Yeah, I want to clarify that that application has to be submitted by your state. It hasn't been released yet by CMS. It's reportedly going to be released in September, has to be submitted by December 31st. And some states will get more of the 50 billion than others. But to your point, that it is important for you to reach out to your state office of rural health, your legislators, your in the California DHCS, to indicate that this is a tremendous need for your organizations to drive adoption. I'll also just point out that for the California-based folks, CTRC does have a resource of sources of funding around grants, and we will refresh and reprise and repost that in a blog in the next month, so you all can see where there are potential opportunities down to the county level. It turns out in our state, we have some county sources of funding for digital adoption.
And probably shameless plug for those online. I would reach out to your regional TRC. They have their ear pretty close to the ground on funding opportunities, and it doesn't necessarily have to be AI specific. If there are programs out there to help critical access hospitals, FQHCs, just improve. And I think that's one of the things, like with telehealth, we don't talk about it quite as much anymore because it is part of the standard of care. And I think we'll get there with AI as well, as we're improving outcomes. And so, but all right, I think we are at time. Yes, we are at time. So I want to go ahead and wrap up this session, and we're going to hand it over to Sylvia for some closing remarks. But thank you for our speakers. This was really, really insightful.
So we're going to be really quick, folks, online and in person. In order for us to continue to offer these for free and complimentary, it's really critical that you all take your survey. We have to demonstrate impact, and we would appreciate for you to take this QR and take a picture. And we're going to thank our online folks for joining us. We look forward to you possibly joining us for follow-on cohort group going into the fall. There'll be announcements about a cohort based on the boot camp here. And so with that, we thank you, and that concludes the virtual programming, and we appreciate you all, and we'll be talking to you soon.